Chapter 170. Shun Yu froze for a moment before he realized what Shang Junlin was referring to. Unwilling to be outdone, he said, "Your Majesty, you can try. You has promised me. You can't go back on your word." Shang Junlin chuckled. "What do I have to regret?" Shun Yu licked his lips. A different majesty should have a different taste. Shang Junlin bit his earlobe and picked up the painting on the table. "Why did you want to paint me like this? Maybe I've heard too much these days. I can't help but wonder what your majesty looks like when you go to the battlefield." Shun Yu had never seen Shang Junlin like that. People would always be interested in things that they had never seen before. If a Yu wants to see you, just say so. "The armor that I wore in the past is in the palace. I'll ask Meng Chang to find it." Shang Junlin was happy to fulfill his small wishes. Eunuch Meng received the order and went to the warehouse to find the armor that Shang Junlin wore in the past. After wiping it clean, he presented it. Shang Junlin raised his arm and motioned for the palace servant to put it on for him. However, Shun Yu stopped him. Shun Yu looked at the cold armor and said, "I can already imagine your majesty wearing it." Shang Junlin walked over. "Why don't you want to see it? This armor, I hope that there will never be a day when I see your majesty wearing it." Shun Yu's voice gradually lowered. When would the emperor wear the armor? This would only happen when there was no one in the court who could be used. Shun Yu hoped that Daheng would be able to maintain peace and stability for a long time and that such a day would never happen. "Since Yu doesn't want to see it, I won't wear it." Shang Junlin waved his hand. "Take it away." The palace servant took the armor and left. Seeing that Shun Yu was not in a good mood, Shang Junlin deliberately said something that would make him happy. Northern Mo was defeated. I asked the Prime Minister and the Minister of Revenue to discuss compensation. Does Yu have anything he wants? The Northern Desert is willing to compensate. Shun Yu was surprised. No matter how he looked at it, the Northern Mo didn't seem to be so generous. "Of course not. They only sent me a letter of surrender. The compensation is what I asked for. They took the initiative to provoke me, so they should pay the price. Your Majesty is right. If we don't let them feel the pain, they will dare to do it again." Shun Yu couldn't agree more with Shang Junlin's decision. Shang Junlin was dissatisfied when he spoke of these old officials. Some of the officials in the imperial court even feel that this is a loss of grace. "We think that they have been studying too much these past few years. Compared to the robbers who invaded the Great Huan dynasty, what is there to talk about? Your Majesty, you don't have to care about them. Compensation is a must. Which war doesn't have sacrifices? Even if it's for the sake of these soldiers who sacrificed their lives, they should compensate us. As for the people who were sacrificed, what were they? Weren't you the ones who wanted to start the tournament? What does it have to do with the Great Huan dynasty? In this war, Jiyu Huai's performance was very outstanding. After a while, he will be able to return to the capital to report on his work." Shang Junlin stroked Shun Yu's long hair. "Your Majesty, have you announced his achievements in the imperial court? Does imperial physician Jiyu know what Jiyu Huai has been doing during this time? No matter what, they were people who went through thick and thin together in the previous life. In this life, there was imperial physician Jiyu between them." Shun Yu couldn't ignore Jiyu Huai's situation. "Not yet. There are some problems with his identity. I plan to wait until he comes back. Originally, without this sudden war, Jiyu Huai would have to stay in Subei for at least 3 or 4 years. With such a long time as a buffer, the possibility of manipulating things in the middle would be high enough." Subei. In the barracks of the Subei army. After the victory of the war, the general of the Subei army waved his hand and held a celebration banquet to reward those who deserved it. "What is young General Jiyu doing?" Jiyu Huai sat alone in a corner drinking wine. A general who was on good terms with him came over. The two clinked their wine pots. Jiyu Huai said, "What should I say when I go back?" "Just say it. Young General Jiyu has made a great contribution this time. Even if you don't say anything, the imperial court will remember it. It's not that. I don't know how to tell my family. I didn't tell them that I came out." Jiyu Huai took a sip of wine. "So that's what you're worried about. It's okay. A good man's ambition is to travel far. Besides, you've made a great contribution. Your family won't blame you. He could understand. Jiyu Huai was still young. At first, many of his subordinates were dissatisfied with him leading the army. After a few victories, everyone was convinced. They couldn't help but be convinced. Although he was young, he was indeed talented in the field of military strategy. No matter how difficult the situation was, he could turn it around. It could be said that as long as he took action, there was no chance of defeat. The people who were sent to his army were dissatisfied and disdainful at the beginning. Now, they called him General Jiyu. They were convinced. Jiyu Huai looked at the moon in the sky and didn't say anything. It was the first time he had been separated from his brother for so long. He didn't know if his brother was angry. By the way, you're from the capital. The medicine in the capital is really good. Thanks to the medicine brought by Imperial Physician Wu, many of the wounded soldiers were saved. Our current emperor is also generous. He gave the soldiers pay and provisions as if they didn't cost money. If it weren't for the fact that we replenished the provisions immediately after the disaster relief, it would have been much more difficult to win this time. After winning the war, the people in the north of Subei were jubilant. On the contrary, the atmosphere in the northern desert was gloomy. When they started the war, the people of the northern desert didn't expect that they would lose so badly. Didn't you say that the soldiers in the north of Subei don't have enough pay and provisions? Is this what you meant by a few days? The emperor of the northern desert was angry when he thought about how he had been fooled by the northern army. The news from the northern desert was that the northern army's pay and provisions were used to help the people. At that time, our people hadn't been discovered yet. They couldn't have sent back fake news. Then how do you explain the current situation? The ministers stammered and didn't know what to say. Forget it. A defeat is a defeat. The surrender letter has been given. It's useless to say anything else. The emperor of the northern desert seemed to have accepted the situation and sighed deeply. They couldn't win the war. What else could they do except to accept their fate? Your Majesty, I heard that a prince in the Great Huan Kingdom led the army to rebel. Why don't we cooperate with that prince? The emperor of the northern desert's eyes flashed. There's such a thing. Tell me more. The official who spoke lowered his eyes, concealing the scheming look in his eyes. I only heard about this by chance. Actually, the emperor of Great Huan's most favored emperor wasn't the one currently sitting on the throne, but another prince. His Highness, Prince Yu, is leading an army to reclaim his rightful position. Under the curtain of the night, there were countless conspiracies in the operation of the people with ulterior motives. After dinner, Shun Yu and Shong Junlin took a walk in the corridor. Shun Yu, even if we win this time, Your Majesty should pay more attention to the movements of the northern desert, especially now that the matter of Prince Yu hasn't been solved. Shong Junlin, Yu thinks that Prince Yu will collude with the northern desert? Shun Yu said, Your Majesty, do you still remember the people who controlled Feng Pingqi behind the scenes? At the same time, they were also in contact with the Subei officials who were punished. Although there is no conclusive evidence that they colluded with the northern desert, we can't rule out this possibility. Shong Junlin, after this defeat, the northern desert's hatred for the Great Huan Kingdom will only deepen. Especially since I made them lose so much. If the two sides have a way to contact each other, it's very likely that they will collude. In order to prevent this from happening, Shong Junlin ordered all the officials, especially in places like the northern desert that bordered the northern desert, to report as soon as they found any abnormalities. The imperial court's order quickly spread to the northern desert. He Chengyu and Jiang Huiqing were now able to take charge. After Fang Jun's departure, they grew quickly and firmly grasped the northern desert in their hands. They used the fastest speed to get the northern desert back on the right track. Compared to the administrators, Fang Jiari was more inclined to deal with the northern desert. Because of her previous achievements, the imperial court had also given her a more suitable official position. Yaoji did not leave. Instead, she became a low-ranking official working under Fang Jiari and changed her name to Jiang Yao. With Fang Jiari's outstanding performance, the people of the northern desert accepted the appearance of a second woman working in the government. After the imperial court's decree was issued, the upper echelons of the northern desert gathered to discuss the follow-up matters. The imperial court means that the northern desert's surrender is not enough. They need to compensate for the losses they caused to the Great Huan Kingdom. I was originally worried that the imperial court would simply accept it. The document from the northern desert only had the title of surrender. It didn't have any intention of reflecting on their actions. They probably think that the Great Huan Kingdom won't care about them. After this document is sent to the northern desert, I can already imagine the expressions on their faces. This time, I'm afraid we'll have to trouble Master Fang again. Everyone in the northern desert knew that as long as Fang Jiari made a move, the northern desert would have absolutely no room to fight back. They could only lay down their weapons and surrender. The weather was getting colder. Shang Junlin's birthday was coming soon. Last year, Xinyu gave him a copy of the flood control manual. It was half a gesture of goodwill. Now that their relationship was very different from before, the gift should also be different. The situation was special. Shang Junlin's birthday banquet this year was not grand. On the day of his birthday, Shang Junlin was still busy with state affairs. Xinyu had prepared a birthday gift in advance. It was a painting. Unlike the battlefield that Xinyu had drawn last time, which was mainly black, this painting was mainly warm. It was full of spring, and hundreds of birds were singing. It presented a scene of vitality. Xinyu was thinking about sending the painting as soon as possible. That night, she couldn't sleep well. Feeling the person in his arms turn over again, Shang Junlin had no choice but to hold her tightly in his arms. If you really can't sleep, you can do something else with me. Xinyu was actually very sleepy. She pushed Shang Junlin with half-opened eyes. What time is it now? It's almost midnight. Go to sleep. If there's anything, we can talk about it tomorrow. Shang Junlin gently patted Xinyu's back as he said this. No. Xinyu struggled to open her eyes. I have to go down. Shang Junlin didn't let go of her. If there's anything, just let the palace servants do it. It's very cold outside at night. It's a gift for your majesty. Does your majesty not want it? Shang Junlin reacted for a while. Then he remembered that tomorrow was his birthday. He found it funny. You didn't sleep in the middle of the night just to give me a birthday gift. Xinyu was sleepy. Her mind wasn't very clear. She thought that Shang Junlin didn't like it. She said in a low voice, if your majesty doesn't like it, then forget it. Why wouldn't I like it? Shang Junlin couldn't bear to see Xinyu sad. He hugged her and comforted her. No matter what you gives, I'll like it. Chapter 171. Shang Junlin hugged and coaxed him for a while. Seeing that Xinyu still insisted, he could only wait with him. Fortunately, it was not long before the time was up. Under Shang Junlin's insistence, Xinyu told the palace servant where the painting was. The palace servant brought the painting over. I'll go get it myself. You lie down. No. Xinyu sat up with the quilt, wrapped himself in a thick cloak, and got out of bed. Shang Junlin could not persuade him, so he let him do as he pleased. Xinyu went to the outer room. After a while, he came in with the painting. Shang Junlin hurriedly hugged him in his arms. Are you cold? There's an earth heater in the room. How can I be cold? Xinyu woke up a little and handed the painting to Shang Junlin. I must be the first person to say happy birthday to your majesty. Happy birthday, your majesty. Shang Junlin felt that this sentence was the best birthday gift he had ever received. After giving the gift, Xinyu felt that he had achieved his goal. Sleepiness continued to surge. He blinked. I'm going to sleep. After that, he closed his eyes without waiting for Shang Junlin's response. He was indeed sleepy. Not long after, his breathing calmed down. Under the dim candlelight, Shang Junlin looked at the sleeping young man in his arms. His eyes were surging with emotions that no one could see clearly. Xinyu slept until dawn. He did not know that because of his sudden action, the man could not sleep for most of the night. After a good sleep, Xinyu felt refreshed. He first went to see the flowers he raised. Winter had arrived. Some of the flowers that bloomed in winter had bloomed one after another. The most amazing thing was the unknown flower sent by Prince En. Since it bloomed, it had not withered. Young master, this flower is really amazing. Will it keep blooming? Mu Shi was Shen Yu's personal palace maid. She basically followed Shen Yu when he came to see the flowers. Perhaps. It's good to keep it blooming. It would be a pity for such a beautiful flower to wither. As if responding to Shen Yu's words, the flower swayed gently. This servant has always felt that this flower is very spiritual. Every time Gongzi comes to see it, it is very lively. Mu Shi looked at the flower curiously. All things have a spirit. This servant feels that this flower also likes Gongzi very much. After so many days, Shen Yu was sure that the flowers wouldn't have a bad influence on people. After thinking for a while, he moved the flowers to the greenhouse that he often went to. After moving the flowers over, he saw the flowers more often. Not only did Mu Shi think so, Shang Junlin and Shen Yu also had the same feeling. According to the palace maids, when Shen Yu did not come, the flowers would not move. But when Shen Yu came, the flowers would shake their branches and leaves from time to time as if they were welcoming him. Shen Yu felt that it was very interesting. He stretched out his hand and touched the blooming petals. It was cold to the touch and was very different from other flowers. Shen Yu only touched it for a while before moving his hand away. He watered the other flowers and left with Mu Shi. The people in the manor have been trained according to young master's request. Now, there are some results. They sent someone to ask if we should continue or send some people out first. On the path, Mu Shi reported to Shen Yu in a low voice about what happened outside the palace. Before Shen Yu entered the palace, he already had a group of his own people. It was just that he entered the palace in a hurry and didn't have time to settle these people down. It was also unlike his previous life where he could directly train these people and use them. After settling down in the palace, Shen Yu gave instructions on how to train these people. After a year, he had almost achieved the results he wanted. According to the plan, send some people out first, especially to Hanju City. I need to know the situation over there, Shen Yu said. Among the people he trained, there were people who specialized in intelligence. Shen Yu was in the palace, so he didn't know much about the outside world. He needed a pair of eyes to pass on the news from outside the palace. The development in this life was very different from his previous life. In his previous life, the King of Yu didn't rebel at this time, nor was he forced to do something beyond his ability. In his previous life, the King of Yu's reputation was extremely good. His rebellion was what the people wanted. But it was different in this life. Now that the King of Yu's reputation was ruined, he was a traitor in the eyes of others. The hat of rebellion was placed on his head, and it couldn't be removed easily. For the King of Yu, who had always cared about his reputation, this was undoubtedly an uncomfortable matter. Oh right, isn't it popular among the scholars to criticize the King of Yu? There are also all sorts of stories and nursery rhymes. Get them to think of a way to pass these things to Hanju City. It's best if they can reach the ears of the King of Yu. How could the King of Yu not hear such a pleasant voice? When he returned to the Yuzhong Palace, Shang Junlin still hadn't returned. Thus, Shen Yu went to the small study room. The small study room was decorated later. Aside from the books that Shang Junlin often used, the rest were all read by Shen Yu. There were stories from outside the palace, unique books from the Imperial Library, and books that Shang Junlin collected from all over the world. There were all sorts of books, and as long as it was something that Shen Yu was interested in, it would appear here. Shen Yu would also usually paint here. Some time ago, in order to prepare a surprise for Shang Junlin, he even asked Mu Shi to stand guard outside when he was painting. If Shang Junlin came, she would inform him. Young master, are you going to paint? Seeing Shen Yu walking to the desk, Mu Shi asked. No, give me a copy of the register from the manor. Give me the latest one. In a year's time, only those who passed the training could gain Shen Yu's trust. Mu Shi walked to the shelf and opened a secret compartment, taking out the register. Seeing him take out a few books, Shen Yu said, "Let me take a look at them." Mu Shi came over with the register and placed it on the table. Some of these registers were brought in by Shen Yu when he entered the palace, and some were sent in later. Shen Yu didn't intend to stay in the palace for long. If he didn't have enough power, He wouldn't be able to live the life he wanted after leaving the palace. These people were the backup plan he had prepared for himself. Now that he had dispelled the thought of leaving, it was time to change the arrangements for these people. Shun Yu was busy in the study room for the entire afternoon. When the sun set, Eunuch Meng came looking for him. Mu Shi walked over and asked, "Eunuch Meng, is there something important?" "His Majesty ordered me to pick you up. His Majesty is in a meeting with several ministers and can't leave for the time being." Eunuch Meng explained the purpose of his visit. Shun Yu put down the brush, rubbed his wrists, and walked out. "His Majesty has plans for today. His Majesty only ordered me to pick you up. He didn't say anything specific." Shun Yu tied it up and walked out of the palace. He found that the carriage had been prepared outside. Shun Yu was taken to the imperial study room. Shang Junlin was still in a meeting. Shun Yu didn't go in to disturb him. Instead, he went to the side chamber. Shun Yu rarely came here. The decoration of the side chamber was very elegant. There were pastries and tea in the hall, all of which were Shun Yu's favorite. Eunuch Meng stayed for a while and continued to serve in the imperial study room. Not long after, the door of the side chamber was pushed open again. Shang Junlin, dressed in court attire, walked in. Shun Yu greeted him. "His Majesty, what did you bring me here for? I wanted to see you as soon as possible." Shang Junlin put his arm around Shun Yu's waist. "There will be a small banquet in the palace later. Come with me." "Your Majesty can't wait for such a small banquet." Shun Yu raised his eyebrows. "If I didn't see you sleeping soundly, I would have woken you up in the morning. Who didn't sleep last night and insisted on giving me a gift, Chem?" "Your Majesty, don't tell me that you didn't sleep well last night because of my gift. What are you thinking about, are you?" Shang Junlin flicked his forehead. Eunuch Meng couldn't help but criticize him. "You didn't sleep last night. You were so excited that you went around looking for a place to put the painting that you sent. Did your Majesty see the painting? Do you like it? It's a pity that it's not as useful as last year's." "This year." Shang Junlin lowered his head and kissed Shun Yu's lips, interrupting him. "Yu doesn't need to say these things. I've said before that no matter what Yu sends, I'll still like it. This time, Yu sent me a painting personally. I'm very happy. Yu's intentions, I feel it." Shun Yu took the initiative to put his arm around Shang Junlin's neck and kissed him. "This is also your Majesty's birthday gift." Shang Junlin used his arm's strength and unceremoniously took the initiative. As the ruler of a country, Shang Junlin's birthday was not only his birthday. Usually, the palace would hold a banquet at this time. The size of the banquet was determined by the situation of the year. If not for the fact that Shun Yu was the only one in Shang Junlin's harem, there would also be a palace banquet attended by the harem members. State banquets were usually hosted by the Ministry of Rites. Because of the special situation this year, Shang Junlin didn't intend to hold a grand banquet. However, since the northern Jiangsu army had won the battle, they couldn't not show it at all. In the end, the Ministry of Rites decided to hold a smaller banquet. At the same time, it was also a celebration banquet. There wasn't much time left before the banquet began. Shun Yu and Shang Junlin stayed in the side hall for a while and then moved to the main hall where the banquet was held. When they arrived, the ministers were already seated. Shang Junlin held Shun Yu's hand and walked to the high seats. This time, no one dared to stand out and say anything. The events of last year's banquet were still vivid in their minds. The officials who offended the emperor had not been reinstated. The ministers hadn't had enough of their positions yet. Shun Yu sat next to Shang Junlin and could see the expressions of the ministers below. The process of the banquet was simplified a lot. First, Shang Junlin's blessings were presented, followed by the gifts prepared by the ministers. When this was almost over, Shang Junlin raised his head and signaled. Eunuch Meng came over with the imperial edict. Next, it was time to reward the northern Jiangsu army. Although they weren't present, the rewards would reach the northern Jiangsu army at the fastest speed and be delivered to everyone who deserved it. After Eunuch Meng finished reading the imperial edict, the ministers noticed a very strange name. Jiyu Huai. Before today, no one had heard of this name. However, In this war with the northern desert, the owner of this name had performed so well that His Majesty had made an exception and given him a higher official position. This made them very concerned. Just who on earth was this Jiu Huai? Seeing the surprised expressions on the ministers' faces, Shen Yu lowered his voice and asked, "Your Majesty didn't mention Jiu Huai to them before?" He didn't mention the specific name. There are some problems with Jiu Huai's identity. If we let them know in advance, there may be unnecessary incidents. Shang Junlin picked up a piece of meat with his chopsticks and put it in Shen Yu's bowl. "Your Majesty should know his true identity now, right?" Shen Yu picked up the meat and put it in his mouth. Since Shang Junlin intended to cultivate Jiu Huai, at least on the premise that there were no problems with him in all aspects. No matter how he looked at it, Shang Junlin didn't seem like someone who would cultivate an enemy's character. "If I didn't know, how could I rest assured and let him go to the northern Jiangsu army?" Shang Junlin stroked Shen Yu's hair. "I'll tell you in detail when we go back." Shen Yu nodded. Since it was a banquet, there was naturally no lack of singing and dancing. After the formal process was over, it was time to enjoy. The sound of stringed and woodwind instruments rang out. The dancers nimbly danced. Their light muslin fell, revealing their graceful figures and moving movements. Perhaps it was because they didn't have many opportunities to perform, but as soon as they appeared, the dancers did their best to show their most beautiful side. Shen Yu looked at them a few more times. Shang Junlin, who was dissatisfied, pinched his chin and turned him over. Why are you looking so seriously? Their dancing skills are so good, but they don't have many opportunities to perform." "What a pity." Shen Yu sighed. If you like, I'll let them dance for every day." Shang Junlin's fingers stroked the soft skin of Shen Yu's chin. It was obviously a gentle tone, but for some reason, Eunuch Meng, who was standing behind the two, heard a sense of coldness. "Your Majesty is obviously unhappy. Why do you have to say it out loud and make yourself angry?" Shen Yu mercilessly exposed the man's insincerity. "Why would I be unhappy? Tell me about it." The man's face was reflected in Shen Yu's eyes. He smiled and said in a teasing tone, "Because your Majesty is jealous." "I am indeed jealous." Shang Junlin narrowed his eyes. "You made me jealous on my birthday. You will have to make it up to me tonight." Looking at the man's dark eyes, Shen Yu couldn't smile anymore. Chapter 172. Shen Yu felt a dull pain in his waist. Shang Junlin paid attention to his facial expression and noticed a momentary change. "What was you thinking just now?" He was thinking about how to fool the emperor tonight. Shen Yu answered silently in his heart. He picked up some vegetables that he disliked the most and put them in Shang Junlin's bowl. "Nothing. I just think that your Majesty should cool down a little." Shang Junlin knew exactly when Shen Yu's facial expression changed. Naturally, he also knew why his facial expression changed. However, how could he let go of the meat that was already in his mouth? He pretended not to know. Shang Junlin ate the vegetables in his bowl without changing his facial expression. After this incident, Shen Yu no longer had the interest to continue enjoying the song and dance. Sometimes, he liked to tease Shang Junlin, but he knew when to stop. Of course, the more important reason was that if he continued to tease Shang Junlin, his waist might not be the only thing that would suffer tonight. Shang Junlin was not interested in the song and dance. Compared to the dancers dancing in the middle of the hall, he preferred to watch Shen Yu. Shen Yu, who did nothing, was as dazzling as anyone else in his eyes. Without the interest to watch the song and dance, Shen Yu put his attention back to the front. He and Shang Junlin talked as if there was no one else around, which shocked many of the ministers. They knew that Shen Yu was very favored, but hearing the news and seeing it with their own eyes could not be compared to the shock. Shang Junlin, who was with Shen Yu, was very different from the image of the emperor in their memory. Many people could not help but sigh in their hearts, so, His Majesty also has such a side. Good wine was placed in front of the ministers. Naturally, there was also wine in front of Shen Yu and Shang Junlin. Because Shen Yu could not drink, Shang Junlin only drank 2 sips when the ministers toasted him at the beginning. After that, he did not touch the wine in his cup. Shen Yu was a little greedy. When Shang Junlin was not paying attention, he took his cup and took a sip. He knew that he shouldn't drink too much, so he only took a small sip. Under the spicy taste, Shen Yu couldn't help but frown. His current body hadn't gotten used to the taste of wine. Just one mouthful made him feel a little dizzy. Shen Yu looked at the wine glass and wanted to take another sip. Suddenly, a big hand reached over and snatched the glass from his hand. Shen Yu followed her hand and looked up. Shang Junlin looked at him helplessly. "Why did you drink when I wasn't paying attention?" "I only took a small sip. I didn't drink too much." Shen Yu defended himself. Shang Junlin saw that his gaze was still fixed on the cup in his hand, so he simply brought the cup to his mouth and drank the wine in the cup in one gulp. "You can only drink one mouthful, Shen will drink the rest for you." In order to prevent Shen Yu from secretly drinking, Shang Junlin simply asked the palace servants to remove the wine on the table. Shen Yu found it funny. "Your Majesty didn't let me watch the singing and dancing, nor did you let me drink wine. What do you want me to do?" "A Yu only needs to look at Zhen. It would be best if he didn't pay attention to anything else." Shen Yu drank the wine and felt a little stuffy. "Your Majesty, I want to go out for a walk." "Why?" "It's a little stuffy in the hall. I want to go out for some fresh air." The fire in the hall was burning brightly. The doors and windows were closed. It was warm, but it was easy to get stuffy if one stayed for a long time. "Wait for Zhen will go back with you." Shang Junlin called Eunuch Meng and whispered a few words to him. Then, he got up and said, "Let's go, a Yu." In this kind of banquet, after the necessary procedures were completed, one could leave early. Not to mention, Shang Junlin was the emperor of Da Huan. No one could stop him from doing whatever he wanted. After he left, the atmosphere in the hall became more lively. Before going out, Shang Junlin carefully wrapped Shen Yu with a cloak. "It's cold outside. Be careful not to catch a cold." When the door was opened, the cold wind swept in. Shen Yu couldn't help but shiver. His slightly muddled mind was blown by the wind and became sober. The man's warm palm wrapped around his. The two walked side by side on the small path. The palace servants were far behind them. When they arrived at Yuzhang Palace, Shen Yu, who was originally a little tipsy, was completely sober. "Your Majesty, did you just leave the ministers there?" Shen Yu asked when he saw that Shang Junlin had no intention of leaving. "They are not as important as a Yu. Today is Zhen's birthday. Zhen is here to receive the gift." Shang Junlin's hand on Shen Yu's waist rubbed it meaningfully. "Didn't your Majesty give me the gift yesterday?" Shen Yu pressed down the hand that was about to reach into his lapel. "A Yu took the initiative to give it to you. Today, Zhen is asking for it from a Yu. Will a Yu give it to me?" Shang Junlin's arm tightened and pulled Shen Yu close to him. He could clearly feel the changes in his body. The kiss fell on the side of Shen Yu's neck. The man's voice became more and more hoarse. "Zhen wanted to do this just now. How can a Yu look at others?" Sure enough, it was still because of the matter with the dancer. Shen Yu knew that he couldn't escape tonight, but he couldn't help but want to struggle. His hands were restrained, his breathing was robbed, and all his escape routes were blocked in advance. The temperature of his body was getting higher and higher. It was as if a fire had been lit, burning from the inside out. Wherever his fingertips touched, a tremor followed. Shen Yu was in the middle of the vast and boundless sea. He was thrown up high along with the waves. Shang Junlin was as domineering as ever. No matter how Shen Yu begged for mercy, he refused to slow down. The waves were getting bigger and bigger. Shen Yu clung tightly to the man who was holding him. The candlelight flickered for the whole night. The sky was getting brighter. Shen Yu couldn't bear it anymore. He kicked the man who was still in the mood. "Stay away from me." Shen Yu sucked in a breath of cold air and wrapped himself in the quilt. No matter how Shang Junlin persuaded him, he refused to come out. "Zhen promises that this time, I won't do anything. I just want to wash you." Shen Yu turned over and faced the man with the back of his head. His voice was obviously full of distrust. "You said the same thing just now." As a result, when he let his guard down, he was dragged to do it again. Shang Junlin tried to persuade Shen Yu for a while. He wanted to pull off the quilt, but he didn't know how Shen Yu rolled up. He tried several times, but he didn't succeed. In the end, he had to give up. Shen Yu was tired and sleepy. Without the man to disturb him, he fell asleep in a short while. Shang Junlin looked at him for a while. Then, he hugged Shen Yu with the quilt and slowly closed his eyes. Shang Junlin only rested for a while before he had to get up for the morning court. When the time came, Eunuch Meng came in quietly to serve him. Shang Junlin put on his coat and went to the outer room. He ordered, "Ask the servants to prepare hot water. When Gui Jun wakes up, send it over." Eunuch Meng lowered his head and tidied Shang Junlin's clothes. "This slave understands. The food will also be heated. I guarantee that Gui Jun won't lack anything when he wakes up." Shang Junlin nodded with satisfaction. "Tell the servants not to disturb Gui Jun. If he doesn't sleep enough, he will lose his temper." In the morning assembly, the main things to talk about were still the same. The northern desert and the King of Yu. Shang Junlin was worried about Shen Yu, who was staying in Jade Gate Palace, so he quickly finished the morning assembly. After the court, the ministers walked out of the hall in twos and threes. His Majesty seems to be in a hurry today. Is there something important? Is there something wrong? If there is something wrong, there should be some movement in the court. Now there is no movement at all. It shouldn't be a big deal. His Majesty directly made Jiyu Huai a general of the 3rd rank. Does anyone know the background of this Jiyu Huai? Last night, someone was sent to investigate. We only know that he is the younger brother of Imperial Physician Jiyu. We can't find anything else. Everyone knew who Imperial Physician Jiyu was. He was responsible for nursing Guijuan's body. He was also the successor of Imperial Physician Wu. Is it because of Imperial Physician Jiyu that His Majesty treats him so well? It shouldn't be. If His Majesty really loves the house, shouldn't he reward Duke Shunbei generously? But look, Gui Jun has been in the palace for a year, and Duke Shunbei's residence hasn't changed. The ministers were not as resistant as before to Shang Junlin only favoring Shen Yu. One of the reasons was that Shang Junlin didn't promote Shen Yu's family members generously. All the ministers didn't want to see the emperor favor his relatives. The relationship between Duke Shunbei and Gui Jun isn't very good. No matter how bad it is, he is still Guijuan's biological father. From this point of view, His Majesty is still very rational. No matter how good he is to Gui Jun, he didn't promote anyone who shouldn't be promoted because of Gui Jun. Besides, Jiyu Huai went through the previous emperor's incident. Now, there are very few capable generals in the court. Young General Jiyu Huai's performance is excellent. He is a moldable talent. It's normal that His Majesty has high hopes for him. That's right. Talented generals can't be obtained. His Majesty is indeed powerful in this aspect, but is also the ruler of the Great Huan Kingdom. He can't possibly put on his armor and go into battle whenever there's a problem. Because Shang Junlin was in a hurry, it was still early when the ministers left the palace. When they returned, they might be able to have breakfast with their families. When Shen Yu woke up, the sky was already bright. Shen Yu was still in the same position as when he wrapped himself in the quilt last night. The other side of the bed was empty. He struggled to roll out of the quilt. Looking at the mottled marks on his body, Shen Yu sighed. His rationality came back. When he felt the stickiness on his body, Shen Yu's expression changed a few times. In the past, every time he woke up, his body was dry. Only this time, because of his own reasons, it stayed until the next day. If you want to blame Shang Junlin, it was he who refused to cooperate. If you don't blame him, it's him who caused this. Shen Yu sat up with a complicated expression. Yu is awake. Shang Junlin came in with warm water. Drink some water first. Shen Yu was very thirsty. He drank a cup of water from Shang Junlin's hand. When he felt his throat was much better, he said, I want to wash up. I've already asked people to prepare hot water. After receiving Shang Junlin's order, the palace servants quietly carried the hot water in. After putting it down, they bowed their heads and left. Your Majesty, if you still don't know how to control yourself next time, you can go back to your own palace to sleep. The 10-day promise had been broken countless times. Later, Shang Junlin knew when to stop and didn't toss and turn for half the night. Shen Yu let him be. Last night, Shang Junlin seemed to have been stimulated by something. Shang Junlin knew that he went a little too far last night. He carried Shun Yu into the bathtub without complaint. When he saw the marks he left on the youth's body, his eyes darkened. He took a handkerchief from the side and carefully wiped Shun Yu. Shang Junlin was already familiar with this kind of thing. Shun Yu was lying on the edge of the bathtub with his eyes slightly closed. His skin was faintly discernible under the water. The youth was half lying in front of him without any defense. Shang Junlin's throat moved, and his arm was submerged in the water. Shun Yu suddenly opened his eyes and grabbed the hand. "Your Majesty, what do you want to do?" Chapter 173. If you don't wash yourself clean, you will get sick. Shang Junlin looked at him calmly. There was nothing strange on his face. "I'll wash myself." Shun Yu held his hand and didn't let him move. Shang Junlin's eyes flashed with a trace of regret. "You really don't need my help." Shun Yu quickly pushed his hand away. "No need." Seeing that he insisted, Shang Junlin slowly withdrew his hand. Shun Yu thought that he had given up and was slightly relieved. Unexpectedly, Shang Junlin took advantage of his relaxed state and held his hand. "Let me do it." "It's not convenient for you to do it alone," Shang Junlin chuckled. "Besides, it's not the first time I've done this. You doesn't need to worry." Shun Yu suddenly grabbed the edge of the bathtub. He wanted to say that he wasn't worried about this, but unfortunately, he didn't have the chance. The water splashed. In order to make it easier for them to move, Shang Junlin followed him into the bathtub. Shun Yu could sit in the bathtub alone, but it was a bit awkward for two men to sit together. There was nowhere to hide, so they could only stick close to each other. Shun Yu's fingers that were grabbing the edge of the bathtub were pulled away by the men. "If you don't feel well, you can hold on to me." Shun Yu's hands and feet were weak. He wasn't a match for the men at all. When he fell into the hands of the men, he could only let them do whatever they wanted. "Didn't you say that you would help me wash? What is your Majesty doing?" Shun Yu's voice was slightly panting. "This." Shang Junlin sucked on Shun Yu's bright earlobe. "Won't it make you cleaner? How can you wash like this?" Shun Yu bit his lower lip, not wanting to let his voice overflow. The bath took more than an hour. When Shun Yu was carried out, his whole body was red. After changing his clothes, Shun Yu leaned on the soft couch. Shang Junlin sat beside him and consciously massaged him. Shun Yu couldn't help but reflect on himself. He didn't take Shang Junlin lightly. Shang Junlin also didn't eat anything nutritious last night. Why was it so out of control? What he didn't know was that the night before, he had kept up with the time to give Shang Junlin a gift. Even though he was so tired, he still insisted on doing it. It made Shang Junlin's heart melt. It was an indescribable feeling of happiness to be remembered by someone he liked. Shang Junlin's heart was filled with all kinds of emotions. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't want to disturb Shun Yu's dream, he wouldn't have just hugged her for one night. During the day, Shang Junlin knew that he was in the wrong, so he asked the small kitchen to prepare Shun Yu's favorite dishes, which were light. He set up a small table next to the soft couch to feed her. Shun Yu was so hungry that he didn't have the mood to argue with Shang Junlin about what happened just now. After the meal, a minister came to find Shang Junlin. "I'll be back soon." Shang Junlin kissed Shun Yu's forehead. "If there's anything you want to do, just tell them." "Your Majesty, please go." Shun Yu waved his hand. His waist hurt when he saw him now. Shun Yu lay down for a while. Mu Shi came in and said, "Gui Jun, Imperial Physician Ji Yu wants to see you. Today isn't the day to take the pulse. Why is Imperial Physician Ji Yu here?" Shun Yu was puzzled. "Bring him in first." "Did Imperial Physician Ji Yu say what's the matter?" "It seems that he was invited by your Majesty." Mu Shi went out to meet him. Imperial Physician Ji Yu came in with a medicine box. He first saluted Shun Yu. "Greetings, Gui Jun." Imperial Physician Ji Yu doesn't need to be so polite. Imperial Physician Ji Yu stood up and looked at Shun Yu. The young man's face was ruddy, the corners of his eyes were red, and his lips were bright. It was easy to see what he had just experienced. Imperial Physician Ji Yu remembered why he came here, so he went forward to take Shun Yu's pulse. His Majesty asked me to come and take a look at you, Imperial Physician Gu explained. After taking the pulse, Imperial Physician Gu withdrew his hand. There's nothing seriously wrong with your body. It's just that your qi and blood are a little insufficient. I will prescribe some nourishing prescriptions. You'll be fine after taking them for 2 or 3 days. Imperial Physician Gu was called away by the palace early in the morning. He thought that something had happened, but when he arrived at Yuzhang Palace and saw the people, he realized that he was wrong. It was only one night, but he needed to take nourishing prescriptions. Shun Yu's forehead twitched. I'll have to trouble Imperial Physician Gu to wait here for a while. When His Majesty comes back, I'll take a look at him. Yes. Shun Yu didn't want to leave Imperial Physician Gu hanging. He also had something to ask him. Now that General Gu Huai has won the military merit, I congratulate Imperial Physician Gu first. Thank you, Your Majesty. To tell you the truth, I didn't know about this until someone came to announce the good news this morning. He didn't have time to think about it before someone from the palace came to invite him to the palace. Until now, he still didn't have much real feelings about this matter. Regarding Gu Huai's disappearance in the past few days to enlist in the army, Imperial Physician Gu had always felt that it was unreal. In his impression, Gu Huai was still a child who needed his protection. Who knew that one day, this child would fly out of his wings and become a great hero who could support the heavens and earth. He had heard people talk about Gu Huai before. There was an invincible little god of war in the northern Jiangsu army. This matter was talked about enthusiastically in the capital, from the newspapers to the neighbors. Countless people were talking about it. When he heard about this matter in the past, he didn't know that the main character was Gu Huai, so he didn't pay much attention to it. Now that he thought about it, Imperial Physician Gu couldn't help but wonder if Gu Huai would catch a cold at the border. Would he get hurt? Shun Yu was a little tired. He forced himself to chat with Imperial Physician Gu for a while. Then, Shang Junlin came back. Imperial Physician Gu stood up and saluted. Shang Junlin excused Imperial Physician Gu's salute and walked to the soft couch to sit down. How is Your Majesty? These words were directed at Imperial Physician Gu. Your Majesty, Your Highness is doing well. Imperial Physician Gu repeated what he had just said. I specially asked Imperial Physician Gu to stay behind and take Your Majesty's pulse. Shun Yu poked Shang Junlin's arm. I don't feel any discomfort. Under Shun Yu's gaze, Shang Junlin automatically swallowed the rest of his words. Thank you, Imperial Physician Gu. Shun Yu was satisfied. Imperial Physician Gu stepped forward and took Shang Junlin's pulse. After a while, Imperial Physician Gu released his hand. Your Majesty is healthy. There is no problem. Don't you need to take medicine with me? Shun Yu couldn't help but ask. This. Imperial Physician Gu paused. Your Majesty's body is indeed fine. There is no need to take medicine. Shun Yu lay back down weakly. It turned out that he was the only one who was weak. Eunuch Meng sent Imperial Physician Gu out and took the servants in the room with him. Why did you suddenly think of asking Imperial Physician Gu to take my pulse? Shang Junlin picked him up and held him in his arms. Shun Yu twisted and found a comfortable position. Imperial Physician Gu prescribed medicine for me. I thought Your Majesty would take it with me. Shang Junlin finally understood why Shun Yu asked Imperial Physician Gu to stay until he came back. He pinched his chin and said, You underestimate your husband too much. Shun Yu turned his face away. He didn't want to look at him. Shang Junlin ordered people to move the memorials to the soft couch. He held Shun Yu and read the memorials. Shun Yu lay in his arms and fell asleep not long after. Shang Junlin lowered his head and looked at him with a trace of a smile in his eyes. The atmosphere in the palace was warm. Compared to it, the atmosphere in King Yu's palace was bleak. It was approaching the end of the year. It was supposed to be a day of reunion. However, because he was forced into a dead end, King Yu had no choice but to hide in Hanju. He couldn't even return to his fief. He didn't even know where his own people were. He didn't have a single useful subordinate by his side. The people of Hanju had a lot of opinions about them. No one would be happy if they were surrounded in the city for no reason and had to live in fear every day. At first, the people of Hanju didn't react. Later, they realized that they were forced to become part of the rebel army. Many people were dissatisfied. These people banded together and started a small rebellion. Unfortunately, it was quickly suppressed. A few of the troublemakers were killed on the spot, while the rest were locked up in jail. The people of Hanju were furious with King Yu's group, but they didn't dare to say anything. Their lives were in the hands of others, so they couldn't do anything. It was supposed to be the most lively time of the year, but Hanju was desolate. All the doors were closed. If it wasn't for the fact that they had to go out, everyone would stay in their homes. Who knows if they could come back alive after going out? Hanzhou's grain won't last for long. The people that Mr. Tan mentioned aren't here yet. King Yu looked at the middle-aged man in blue with dissatisfaction. Your Highness, there's no need to be anxious. They will be here in a few days. How can I not be anxious? We don't have much grain in Hanju City. What if we starve to death before the imperial court comes? King Yu was extremely anxious after waiting for so many days. He knew that he would be walking on this path, and he had imagined all sorts of scenarios. However, he never expected that he would be in such a dire situation. In his expectations, he had to be fully prepared before taking action. He had to win the hearts of the people. But right now, he was a traitor in the hearts of the people. He was only trying to take back what belonged to him. He could have done it openly. If it wasn't for Shang Junlin, how could he have ended up in this situation? The more he thought about it, the more unresigned he felt. Unknowingly, rumors about King Yu started to spread in Hanju City. Even the nursery rhymes were mocking King Yu. As the rumors spread, it was inevitable that they would reach King Yu's ears. The first time he heard someone compare him to Shang Junlin and criticize him as useless, King Yu smashed everything in his study. The servants stood in the empty room with their heads lowered, not daring to utter a single word. Even after smashing everything, King Yu still couldn't vent his anger. He glared at the other person in the room like an enraged lion. Are there any more rumors about me? I'm ordering you to capture the person spreading the rumors. I want to cut him into pieces. Your Highness, please calm down. The servant knelt down. It's not that I'm unwilling to do it, but now what? The rumors are spreading everywhere. The servant suppressed the fear in his heart. It's not just in Hanju City, it's spreading all over the Great Huan country. Furthermore, some of them are even more ridiculous than this. King Yu's mind was blown. He simply couldn't imagine what the rumors were about him. This was the ending that he had planned for Shang Junlin, but in the end, it fell on him. With a fishy taste in his mouth, King Yu's vision turned black and he fell onto the ground. Your Highness. Someone, come. Your Highness has fainted. The residence was instantly thrown into chaos. Your Highness, you're saying that King Yu fainted from anger? Shun Yu wore a snow-white fox fur coat as he walked in the snow. He looked like an otherworldly immortal. Yes, the news just came from Hanju City. It said that someone told King Yu about the rumors outside. After King Yu heard it, he fainted on the spot. Shang Junlin held onto Shun Yu's hand as he walked leisurely. King Yu is too weak. He can't even take such a small amount. How dare he covet the position of your Highness? Shun Yu sneered. Shang Junlin sensed something and raised his brows. This was done by a Yu. Shun Yu looked at him innocently. Isn't your Highness the clearest about what I do every day? Chapter 174. Shun Yu wasn't joking. Other than the morning court, the two of them spent almost all their time together. Shang Junlin knew this, but when he saw Shun Yu's innocent look, he felt more and more that this matter had something to do with him. Shun Yu had never concealed his disgust for the King of Yu. Shang Junlin had discovered this a long time ago. He had suspected that there was some relationship between them that he did not know of. Later on, when he thought about it, with Shun Yu's personality, what the King of Yu had done previously was enough to make him feel disgusted. No matter who did this, I have to thank him properly. Maybe King Yu's actions angered the public. So many people took the initiative to attack him. In my opinion, King Yu is really strange. Those things were indeed done by him. Since he did it, why didn't he have the guts to admit it? Shen Yu couldn't stand such sanctimonious people the most. Some people are just like that. When I was in the palace, he brought other princes to bully me. After bullying me, he criticized me with a high and mighty attitude, saying that it was because I did something wrong that caused these people to bully me. Whatever he did, he liked to remove himself completely. If it wasn't for the sudden incident, even if it was a rebellion, he would definitely pretend that he was upholding justice. Shang Junlin had known King Yu for a long time, so he knew some of King Yu's thoughts like the back of his hand. Shen Yu wasn't surprised, because it was indeed like this in his previous life. All the bad reputation was pushed to Shang Junlin, and King Yu himself was clean. Your Majesty is right. I'm afraid this matter will make him suffer for a long time. Their guess was right. King Yu was unconscious for an entire day before he woke up. Mr. Tan stayed by his bedside with a gloomy face. What the hell is going on? Why did he suddenly faint? Thinking of what happened before he fainted, King Yu's chest hurt, and he closed his eyes in pain. Mr. Tan obviously knew something. After King Yu fainted, he asked people to interrogate the people who came into contact with King Yu. The results made him feel incredulous. King Yu fainted because of those rumors? Mr. Tan really couldn't understand. He tried to find other possibilities. After a round of investigation, he finally proved that the result was the one he didn't want to believe the most. The doctor said that you were too angry. What could have made you so angry? Mr. Tan tried to make a final struggle. After a moment of silence, King Yu slowly sat up with the help of his servants. His complexion was very bad, and his eyes were filled with complicated emotions. Has Mr. Tan heard the rumors about this prince? His words confirmed all their guesses. Mr. Tan stood up in disbelief. So you fainted because of a few words? Does Mr. Tan feel that these words are neither painful nor itchy? King Yu clenched his fists. Has Mr. Tan already heard about it? Aren't the rumors outside even worse than this? It's just some useless people venting their dissatisfaction. Why do you take it so seriously? Mr. Tan didn't know how to describe his feelings at this moment, but considering that he still needed the Prince of Yu's help in the future, he began to comfort him with mixed feelings. Is there no way to stop it? King Yu lowered his head, so his expression couldn't be seen. I have already ordered them not to speak about it in Hanju City. We can't do anything about other places for the time being. You don't have to worry about it. Once it's done, no one will dare to speak about it. I understand. King Yu rested for a few days before his body recovered. Mr. Tan had ordered that no one was allowed to talk about this matter in front of King Yu. At any time, words couldn't be stopped. The more they were forbidden from speaking about it, the faster it would spread in private. Initially, only a few people knew about it, but after it was forbidden, it became something that everyone in Hanju City knew about. As a result, the dissatisfaction of the people towards King Yu grew. The Northern Desert Emperor received the document from Da Huan. After reading it, the Northern Desert Emperor flew into a rage the entire night and summoned all his ministers for a discussion. What do you think he means by this? The Northern Desert Emperor slammed his hand on the table, causing the table to tremble. The ministers looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. Take a look for yourselves. Trying his best to suppress his anger, the Northern Desert Emperor ordered his servants to read the document from Da Huan. Following the servant's voice, the expressions on the ministers' faces slowly changed. Embarrassment, anger, all kinds of emotions intertwined, creating a brilliant scene. Da Huan's emperor is too much. An old minister's face turned red. He wants us to give out all the resources we've accumulated. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but what Da Huan asked the Northern Desert to hand over was the limit of what they could take out. Da Huan's appetite isn't small. He should see if he can swallow it all. Aside from the resources, there's also the grassland. Lin Yuan is one of the most fertile lands in the Northern Desert. Why should he take it just because he wants it? The hall was instantly filled with an uproar. The Northern Desert Emperor rubbed his forehead tiredly and scolded, "Shut up. Do you think Da Huan can hear you? If you have time to talk about this, why don't you think about how we should deal with it this time? Why is Da Huan suddenly asking for compensation? Haven't they always been proud of their status and didn't care about this? If that wasn't the case, they wouldn't have just handed over a letter of surrender. Who knows why? The current emperor of the Great Huan Kingdom has a bad opinion of the Northern Desert. Not long after he ascended the throne, he ignored the previous emperor's orders and attacked us. Now that he's firmly on the throne, these things are most likely his request. Are we supposed to hand over the things obediently? From the emperor to the ministers and commoners, no one was willing to hand over these things willingly. The Northern Desert was different from the Great Huan dynasty. The Great Huan dynasty was rich in land and resources. The Northern Desert was a nomadic tribe that relied on the sky for food. They often invaded the Great Huan dynasty for the land. Knowing that the Northern Desert people wouldn't hand over these things willingly, the Northern Army had been keeping an eye on them and pressuring them. They had fought for so long and couldn't fight for nothing. Part of the compensation from the Northern Desert would be kept in the Northern Army. Shang Junlin expected the Northern Desert people's unwillingness to cooperate. What does your Majesty plan to do? Shun Yu picked up the document from the Northern Desert and skimmed through it. Now you know how to cry. Why didn't you do it earlier? The Northern Desert Emperor didn't know where he got the inspiration. This time he cried and said that the Northern Desert was also affected by the drought in the Northern Desert. They sent their troops south because they couldn't live anymore and wanted to find a way out for their people. Shen Yu only found it funny. They knew that Da Huan wasn't easy to deal with and wanted to play the emotional card. Unfortunately, their wishful thinking was wrong. Shang Junlin wasn't the kind of person who would be soft-hearted when he shouldn't be. If you can't do it, then wait for the Northern Army to come knocking on your door. Shang Junlin's voice was cold. Finding a way out for your people is not a reason to invade Da Huan. If you really care about your people, you can let them become Da Huan's people. That way, Da Huan's imperial court will protect them from hunger. Don't you think so, Your Majesty? Shun Yu narrowed his eyes. You is right. Since they aren't Da Huan's people, why should Da Huan empathize with them? The imperial court's meaning was clear. The Northern Army was happy to see the imperial court's attitude. They didn't like the Northern Desert for a long time. If they let them go easily this time, they wouldn't be happy. After receiving the imperial court's instructions, the Northern Army was ready to go. It's best if the Northern Desert doesn't know what's good for them. We'll destroy their nest. The people of the Northern Desert are really shameless. They were the ones who wanted to fight the war, but they don't want to admit their loss. They even cried so miserably. When they bullied our Great Huan Kingdom, they didn't show any sympathy. This time, we should be more understanding of them. Why didn't they empathize with us before? That's right. Keep a close eye on them. Don't let the Northern Desert people do anything. Yes. The person negotiating with the Northern Desert people was still Fang Jiari. The Northern Desert people were already afraid of this woman. When they saw her, they subconsciously weakened. Forgive Da Huan for not being able to accept your request. Fang Jiari sat down calmly. Her voice was neither servile nor overbearing. People have to pay for their actions. You Northern Desert people attacked first. Now that you've lost, you naturally have to follow Da Huan's rules. Throughout the whole process, the topic was led by Fang Jiari. Fang Jiari spoke clearly and her words were reasonable. Every word she said was flawless. On the contrary, she could accurately find flaws in the other party's words and use the other party's reasons to make them speechless. The Northern Desert officials who came to negotiate looked pale. Now, everyone in the Northern Desert officials knew that they shouldn't have any dealings with the female official. If they couldn't avoid it, they should obediently admit defeat. They should be mentally prepared early so that they wouldn't collapse after the negotiation. If Fang Jiari took action, there would only be one result. No matter how unwilling the Northern Desert people were, they could only do as Da Huan said under the watchful eyes of the Northern Army. They want to extend the deadline for a few more days. A few days later, the latest progress was sent to the palace. After reading it, Shang Junlin said, they said that they can't gather so many things in a short period of time. When spring comes, they will send the compensation to Da Huan. The Northern Desert resigned themselves to their fate so quickly. Shen Yu was surprised. They also made a presumptuous request. Speaking of this matter, Shang Junlin was a little amused. They hope that the imperial court will quickly summon Fang Jiari back to the capital to work and not stay in the northern desert. It seems that Fang Gunyang contributed a lot to the northern desert's quick resignation. Shen Yu had heard of Fang Jiari's battle prowess. In the northern desert officialdom, Fang Jiari had become an existence that made people pale. Shang Junlin, I have to say, with her around, it saved me a lot of effort. Shen Yu, Your Majesty must reward her for her meritorious service. Shang Junlin, of course. Yu said, when have I not been fair in my rewards and punishments? Shen Yu, in my heart, Your Majesty is of course the best monarch. The matter of the northern desert temporarily came to an end. They said that they couldn't come up with so much compensation in a short period of time. Da Huan also couldn't force them to pay. However, the materials could be slowly gathered, but it was better to get some ready-made things first. For example, the grassland that Shang Junlin had been thinking about for a long time. Specially for giving them time is Your Majesty's kindness to them. For a ready-made existence like a grassland, they can't say that they need to be forgiving, right? Shen Yu's white and slender fingers slowly moved across the list of names and stopped at a certain place. Shang Junlin covered his hand. Yu is right. Didn't they say that the people were trapped in hunger? When I take over, I will solve these problems for them. Chapter 175. This list of compensation wasn't randomly made. It was made by the Ministry of Revenue based on the losses the Northern Desert had brought to the Great Huan Kingdom and the specific situation of the Northern Desert. It happened to be in the middle of a line that would make the people of the Northern Desert feel pain but not unbearable. As for the Northern Desert saying that they needed time to prepare, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin both knew that this was just an excuse. They didn't mean to force them into a corner and just pretended not to know. When the news reached the Northern Desert, the Northern Desert Emperor almost couldn't breathe. How could Da Huan have the nerve to say that seizing their land was for their own good? The Northern Desert Emperor clutched his chest and felt his vision darken. Your Majesty. A servant hurried to support him. Your Majesty, are you all right? Someone come quickly, call the imperial physician. Leaning on the servant's shoulder, the Northern Desert Emperor gritted his teeth and said, call the ministers to discuss this. But, Your Majesty, your body, just do it. I'll be fine after a while. Go quickly. The servant didn't dare to delay and hurriedly went outside the palace to call for people. The ministers were brought to the palace in confusion. Before they had time to wonder what happened, they were shocked by the sudden news. Da Huan wanted them to hand over the pasture immediately. Da Huan's meaning was very clear. The other compensation could be delayed for a while, but the pasture and horses must be given to Da Huan immediately. Didn't they say that the people were so hungry that they couldn't eat before attacking Subei? Da Huan's move can also relieve some of the pressure on you. In the document, it was full of Da Huan is also for the good of the Northern Desert. Don't be ungrateful. No wonder the Northern Desert Emperor almost vomited blood after reading it. Da Huan is simply going too far. Some of the ministers were furious. Do we really have to give up that land? There were also ministers who were panicking. There were also people who were dissatisfied with the Northern Desert Emperor because of this. If he hadn't strongly advocated attacking Da Huan, would today's disaster have occurred? Your Majesty, what do you think of the matter I mentioned before? At this time, a newly promoted minister stood up. What? The Northern Desert Emperor was confused. I think it's feasible to cooperate with Da Huan's King Yu. Cooperate with Da Huan? At this time, we can't even take care of ourselves, yet we still have to help that King Yu fight the Great Huan Emperor? This matter had been brought up in the imperial court before. Many ministers were watching from the sidelines. This time, they were scared of the Northern Army and did not dare to go against them. Originally, the Northern Desert Emperor had been persuaded, but later, several ministers disagreed. After some persuasion, the Northern Desert Emperor gave up the idea. There were still many ministers who disagreed with the idea of bringing up the past. Seeing that they were about to quarrel again, the Northern Desert Emperor quickly said, all right, Alright, let's talk about this later. Now, let's talk about the compensation. In a few days, someone will come to take over Lin Yuan. Are we really going to give it out directly? The hall quieted down. The ministers looked at each other, but no one said anything. With Da Huan saying things to this extent, it was clear that there was no room for negotiation. Which official is negotiating with us this time? Can we give them a few more days? What's the use of extending the deadline? At that time, won't we still have to hand Lin Yuan over? Drag it out. Maybe there will be a turn for the better. This was the Northern Desert's intention from the beginning. It was best to drag it out long enough for Da Huan to completely forget about this matter. Then do you know which official Da Huan's emperor gave the negotiation to this time? As long as it's not Master Fang from the Northern Desert, it doesn't matter who it is. Unfortunately, things did not go as planned. After 2 days, Da Huan sent a message from the negotiator. Who is it? In the imperial court, the Northern Desert Emperor asked the messenger. Replying to Your Majesty, it's Master Fang from the Northern Desert. Da Huan's emperor said that she often interacts with the Northern Desert and they are familiar with each other. The Northern Desert Emperor closed his eyes. This was great. Not to mention that there was no room for negotiation, it was already good enough that they didn't give out more land. Da Huan was really good. For a moment, the atmosphere in the imperial court was extremely cold. Zhu Wang, who had previously been placed in the palace to be served with good food and drink, had been locked up in a secret prison by Shang Junlin after a failed attempt to escape. Regardless of whether there was really something wrong with him or not, since he had already been caught, there was no reason to let him go in vain. In addition, this person seemed to know a bit about Shun Yu's background, so it was even more impossible for Shang Junlin to let him go. Feng Pingqi was beheaded after autumn, and the Feng family was implicated. All the participants were executed. Since then, the Feng family completely disappeared from the capital. As for the person who was caught with them, after confirming that he couldn't get anything out of him, Shang Junlin directly executed him. Because he tried to make a move on Shun Yu, Shang Junlin chose a less pleasant way for him to die. Shun Yu knew about this after everything had happened. On the day of the Feng family's punishment, many people went to watch the execution. This servant heard from the palace made that the people of the capital were very satisfied. Shun Yu picked up a leaf from Junling and looked it up and down. Everyone knows what he did. The bad official got the punishment he deserved. Naturally, they would feel satisfied. Tell Boss Yi that he can collect more articles about the punishment of corrupt officials. This servant understands. Mu Shi admired her young master more and more. It seemed that he didn't do anything, but he could see through everyone's heart. He could guess their behavior without any mistake. Come and take a look at this flower. Is it a little wilted? Shun Yu looked at the Junling in his hand and frowned slightly. Since it was in his hands, the Junling had been in good condition. Recently, he didn't know what happened, but it suddenly became wilted. Shun Yu found a palace maid who was good at flowers and plants in the palace to take a look, but she couldn't find anything. Mu Shi looked down and hesitated. Is it because it's afraid of the cold? There was a heavy snowfall recently, and the temperature suddenly dropped a lot. Move it to my palace first and let it rest for 2 days. If it still hasn't recovered, ask Imperial Physician Ji Yu when he comes to take its pulse. Shun Yu walked around the greenhouse. Because Shang Junlin would send Shun Yu some flowers and plants from time to time, the size of the greenhouse was now more than twice as big as before. There were all kinds of flowers in the greenhouse. Some of them were worth thousands of gold, and some of them could be raised by ordinary people. Shun Yu treated them all equally. He arranged them according to their habits, and every one of them grew well. Mu Shi held the flowers and followed Shun Yu back to the palace. Shun Yu put the Junling in its original place, washed his hands, and went to the small study. In this palace, there were more and more traces that belonged to him. When Shang Junlin came back, the first thing he saw was a pot of flowers in the bedroom. The palace maid hurried to explain. Gui Jun said that the flowers are a little wilted, so he put them here for 2 days to see the situation. Shang Junlin nodded. Where is Gui Jun? Replying to Your Majesty, Gui Jun is in the small study. Shang Junlin did not stay and went straight to the small study. Shun Yu was looking at the map of the Great Huan dynasty. Shang Junlin often signed memorials here, and the map was also left by him. What are you doing? Your Majesty is back. Shun Yu looked up. He's looking at the terrain around Hanju City. Shun Yu was a little concerned about the King of Yu in Hanju City. He guessed that the King of Yu was waiting for someone. After all, with the King of Yu's current military strength, it was basically impossible for him to succeed. The King of Yu would not throw his life away, and neither would the people behind him. Your Majesty, look over here. The mountain range stretches. If the King of Yu has a backup plan, he will most likely enter Hanju City from here. Shun Yu pointed to the west of Hanju City. Aside from the army surrounding Hanju City, I have also sent people to hide in the dark. The place that Yu mentioned has steep terrain, and it's easy to defend. If those people are really hiding in the mountains, it will be difficult to fight. How many people does the King of Yu have now? Around 100,000. These were all forces that entered Hanju City before the Imperial Court could react. After the Imperial Court sent people over, the forces that appeared one after another seemed to have disappeared, never to appear again. The King of Yu was waiting, and so was Shang Junlin. How many things did the previous emperor leave behind for the King of Yu? Shun Yu couldn't understand. No matter what, Shang Junlin was the King of Yu's biological son, and he was even the son of the previous empress. After the previous empress died, the previous emperor did not appoint another empress. So it was impossible for him to not have any feelings for Shang Junlin. Shun Yu couldn't feel it deeply before coming into contact with Shang Junlin. But the more he knew about Shang Junlin's past, the more Shun Yu felt the strangeness. For example, the previous emperor's hostility and malice towards Shang Junlin. The previous emperor left a mess for his son, who could ascend the throne, but left the best things for his other son. I'm not sure. The previous emperor didn't do things properly. I originally thought that he doted on the sixth prince the most. But after the sixth prince died, he acted as if nothing had happened and continued to seek pleasure. Even when the sixth prince's birth mother came to plead for mercy, he kicked her away. Who would have thought that the sixth prince's bloodline, who was in the limelight, would fall so quickly? Shang Junlin went behind Shun Yu and placed his arms beside Shun Yu. His masculine aura enveloped Shun Yu, and Shun Yu raised his head to look at him. Shang Junlin's lips curled up, and his tone was filled with sarcasm. He didn't have a good impression of the previous emperor. Shun Yu's lips moved, but the words that came out of his mouth were, "Does your Majesty want to sit?" After that, he moved to the side to make room for Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin sat down and took Shun Yu into his arms. "You, do you want to sit on my lap?" Without waiting for Shun Yu's response, Shang Junlin had already put him on his lap. The man's body temperature could be felt through his clothes. Shun Yu was used to being hugged by him, so he automatically found a comfortable position to sit. I didn't stay in the capital for a long time, and I didn't spend much time with the previous emperor. The people who were in contact with the previous emperor were either killed by the other princes or by me. There were very few people left, and I couldn't get any information from them. I suspect that even the King of Yu himself didn't know what the previous emperor left for him. Shang Junlin picked up a strand of Shun Yu's hair and played with it in his hand. The previous emperor had always been on guard against the princes. The princes grew stronger, but the emperor grew older. When they were young, there might still be some familial affection. When the princes grew up, how many trials could this thin familial affection withstand? Will your Majesty be like this in the future? Shun Yu knew that he shouldn't ask this question, but at this moment, he wanted to ask, so he asked. I won't have my own children. How can I be like the previous emperor? Unless. Shang Junlin put his palm on Shun Yu's lower abdomen. You can give birth to one for me. Your Majesty, do you think I have this ability? Shun Yu raised his eyebrows. If I work harder, you might be able to. Shang Junlin answered seriously. Shun Yu was speechless. I think your Majesty only wants to work hard for this process. Shang Junlin smiled and bit his ear. How do you know if you don't try? Chapter 176. Shun Yu nudged him with his elbow. Your Majesty, you should think more realistically. This kind of thing won't happen no matter how hard you try. Shang Junlin grabbed his hand and held his wrist tightly. I know. Shun Yu struggled but couldn't get rid of the man's shackles. Fortunately, he let him go. How's the situation in the northern desert? The northern desert has been unwilling to compensate. After hearing that Fang Jiari was the one who negotiated, several ministers claimed to be sick. The northern desert emperor lost his temper in the court and forced a few people to come out. Didn't the people who were chosen look bad? Of course. After the matter was settled, they scolded the officials who claimed to be sick in the court the next day. Even the northern desert emperor wasn't spared. Shun Yu could understand these people's thoughts. Fang Jiari was too powerful. At first glance, this kind of thing wasn't a good job. No matter how it was done, they would only be scolded. Not only that, they would also be tortured internally. Not many people were willing to do this. As an official, there were some who didn't care about their own interests, but there were very few. Obviously, the northern desert officials didn't belong to this group. In order to negotiate for the quota, the northern desert officials fought hard. But unlike others, they didn't fight for the quota, but the quota that they didn't go. The news spread to Subei. He Chengyu, Jiang Huiqing, Fang Jiari, and the others gathered together. Some people couldn't help but laugh. The northern desert really thinks that Daheng is easy to bully. Let's see if we don't peel off a layer of their skin this time. They were all new officials sent to Subei. Most of them were still young and had ambitions in their hearts. In Subei, they had endless opportunities to show off their skills. They were happy to do anything that could make the people of the northern desert unhappy. Lady Fang is truly a woman who doesn't lose out to men. To be honest, at the beginning, I had some opinions about Lady Fang, and I didn't understand why His Majesty made an exception to allow a woman to enter the court as an official. Only now do I know how narrow-minded I was in the past. Today, I toast to Lady Fang. With that, the man raised his wine cup and drank it. Actually, me too. One after another, many people apologized for their prejudices. What I do is a little shocking. It's normal that you didn't understand it at first. Fang Jiari smiled and drank the wine in her glass. It's my honor to work with you. Lord Fang, please don't say that. No matter how you look at it, it should be our honor. The atmosphere at the banquet became more and more lively. Jiang Huiqing and He Chengyu also clinked their wine glasses. The negotiations were set to take place before the new year. The Dahuan Imperial Court wanted the negotiations to be completed before the new year so that the Lin Yuan Ren could have a good new year. There were quite a few people living in the forest plains. They were all pure northern desert people. The Imperial Court had argued several times about whether or not to take them in. Some people believed that those who were not of the Great Huan dynasty had different intentions, so there was no need to care about these people. After occupying the forest plains, these people would naturally become slaves. Others believed that since they belonged to the Great Huan dynasty, they were the people of the Great Huan dynasty and should not be too harsh on them. Both sides clung to their own views and quarreled fiercely. But this matter would not affect the acquisition of the forest plains from the northern desert people. Everything was ready. Fang Jiari changed into an official's robe and led the accompanying officials to the location of the negotiations with the northern desert people. As expected, the negotiation this time went very smoothly. The northern desert people wanted to play some tricks, but the northern army was watching from the side. If there was any movement, they would attack. At the negotiations, Fang Jiari was like a fish in water. She killed the other side and forced them to retreat. At the end of the negotiations, the Dahuan officials were in high spirits. Fang Jiari's face showed that she still wanted to continue. On the other hand, the northern desert officials were all ashen-faced and dispirited. On the spot, Fang Jiari had them sign an agreement. From this day on, the forest plains belonged to the Dahuan dynasty. Jiang Huiqing followed the northern army to the forest plains. Before the imperial court officially appointed officials, the northern desert officials would temporarily govern this land. Many of the northern desert people who originally lived in the forest plains had moved away. Those who were left behind were ordinary herdsmen and abandoned slaves. Some of these slaves came from the Dahuan dynasty. After Jiang Huiqing brought people over, the first thing he did was to find the Dahuan people. After checking their backgrounds, he sent those who were willing to return to the Dahuan dynasty. Those who were unwilling to leave could continue to work in the forest plains. Shang Junlin did not hide his intentions. Soon, the forest plains would become the exclusive horse farm of the Dahuan dynasty. After Jiang Huiqing and the others went over, they needed to deal with any hidden dangers in the forest plains in advance. Congratulations, Your Majesty. You got what you wanted. Shun Yu put down the booklet from the northern desert and put his hands on the table. There are still many follow-up issues to deal with. Jiang Huiqing is a careful person. He has considered many problems in the forest plains, Shang Junlin said as he read through the booklet. What does Your Majesty plan to do with the northern desert people who stayed in the forest plains? Shun Yu asked. Observe them for a while. If they are loyal, I don't mind letting them live in the forest plains. The forest plains and the northern desert are close. Shun Yu looked down and thought. Is there a precedent of intermarriage between the two sides? Yes, there is. Why did you mention this? The officials have been arguing about whether these people should stay or leave. They are worried about all kinds of problems. In the end, isn't it because these people are northern desert people? What if one day, they admit that they are Dahuan people from the bottom of their hearts? In order to tame the people, blindly killing them was not enough. The estrangement in their hearts had to be broken. They had to be tied to the Dahuan dynasty. They were bound together for good or ill. Only when the interests of the people were completely in agreement could some situations be prevented. Shun Yu slowly expressed his thoughts. Your Majesty, you can encourage them to intermarry with the Dahuan dynasty and let them get used to speaking the Dahuan language. You can send teachers from the Dahuan dynasty to teach their children. When this group of people grow old and the younger generation who have been educated by the Dahuan dynasty grow up, will they still admit that they were once northern desert people? Shang Junlin thought about Shun Yu's words. After a few generations, they will completely abandon their identity as northern desert people and truly integrate into the Dahuan dynasty. Yes, this method will take a long time. But it was gentler than any other method. The problem that the imperial court had been arguing about for many days had been solved. It was getting closer and closer to the end of the year. There was still no movement from the King of Yu. In the Northern Desert Army, the general who had returned to the capital to report on his work was ready to leave. Jiyu Huai was among them. They should have left earlier. But they had been delayed for a while to deal with the Northern Desert matters. When they left, it was already very late. They were in a hurry. Coming back with Jiyu Huai was the general who had a good relationship with him. Now he was his adjutant. I have never been to the capital. General, is the capital really as prosperous as the rumors say? The adjutant couldn't help but ask during the journey. It is very prosperous. You will know when you see it. The closer they were to the capital, the more difficult it was for Jiyu Huai to calm down. After the war with the Northern Desert, he wrote a long letter to Imperial Physician Jiyu. In the letter, he explained part of the reason why he joined the army and what happened in the Northern Desert. When he left, it seemed that he left without saying goodbye. Although he wrote a letter later, Jiyu Huai was still worried that Imperial Physician Jiyu would be angry. The capital was very lively. In order to welcome the coming new year, the shops and stalls were filled with New Year's items. People came and went in the streets and alleys. It was very lively. After the result of the negotiation with the Northern Desert came back, the people in the capital talked about one more topic. Have you seen the report this time? The Northern Desert people really think we are easy to bully. They still want to delay and say that they can't gather the materials. I think they want to renege on the debt. Maybe they think that if they delay for a long time, we will forget about it. But no matter how nicely they say it, we will not be fooled. Why should we give up something that belongs to us? Isn't that so? Master Fang of the Northern Desert is really powerful. After so many times, won't the Northern Desert people tremble when they hear her name? Ha 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 ha, they also have a day like this. Master Fang's way of doing things is really satisfying. You don't need to be too kind to your enemies. I have a rumor here. Do you know? The northern desert people wrote a letter to our emperor asking him to transfer Master Fang back to the capital. She can't stay in the northern desert. They can't take it. Ha 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 ha. Really? My uncle works in Master Duan's house. How can the news from there be false? Imperial physician Gu walked on the street and heard all kinds of discussions. When talking about the northern desert, there was no lack of people talking about the battles that Gu Huai participated in. The Gu Huai in these people's mouths was not the same person as the younger brother he had been with for several years. He always felt that it was unreal. Imperial physician Gu stopped in front of a small stall. The stall was full of different kinds of lanterns. In the past, when he was busy, it was Gu Huai who bought these things. This year, Gu Huai was not here, so the house had been deserted. Do you want a pair? Don't be fooled by my small stall. My lanterns sell very well. Imperial physician Gu stopped for a moment. Under the enthusiasm of the stall owner, he bought a pair back. Every household began to prepare for the upcoming new year. The palace also began to decorate. Without needing Shang Junlin and Shen Yu's instructions, Eunuch Meng had already arranged for people to decorate the palace. In Yuzhang Palace, Shen Yu leaned on the soft couch and watched the palace servants bustling in and out. Young master, take a look and see if there is anything that needs to be changed. Mu Shi came in with a hot drink and put it beside Shen Yu's hand. The sweet smell floated along with the hot air. Shen Yu looked at the cup and asked, "What is this?" "This is the milk soup newly developed by the small kitchen. It is made with fresh fruits and milk. Young master, try it and see if you like it." Shen Yu was used to the new products that the small kitchen sent from time to time. He took a sip and the milk and fresh fruits perfectly blended together. The taste was sweet but not greasy. It was the taste that Shen Yu liked. After drinking the milk soup in the small bowl, Shen Yu stood up and looked around. "You have decorated it well. There is nothing to change." While talking, Shang Junlin, who had just finished the morning court, came in. "Something happened in the court today. It is about Duke Shunbei. Do you want to hear it?" Shang Junlin untied his cloak and threw it to Eunuch Meng. "What happened to Duke Shunbei?" In this life, Shen Yu did not pay much attention to Duke Shunbei's family. At first, he asked people outside to keep an eye on Duke Shunbei's residence and report to him from time to time. Later, he simply handed this matter over to Mu Shi. If nothing important happened, he was too lazy to care. Today, Duke Shunbei asked the court to appoint an heir. Shang Junlin's voice was slightly deep. "An heir? Besides me and Shen Qingran, Duke Shunbei has other children?" Chapter 177. If Shen Yu's memory was correct, there should only be him and Shen Qingran in the Count of Zhenbei's residence. Or, in this life, Shen Qingran lost his value and Count of Zhenbei had another child. With Count of Zhenbei's temperament, this was not impossible. But if there was suddenly an heir in the Count of Zhenbei's residence, Mu Shi should have mentioned it to him. "No," Shang Junlin stroked Shen Yu's cheek, "Count of Zhenbei wants to appoint you." "Me?" Shen Yu was even more surprised. "I have already entered the palace. Why does he want to appoint me as the heir? Does he think that I can go back and inherit the Count of Zhenbei's residence after entering the palace? Not to mention that he couldn't inherit it with his current status. Even if he could, Shen Yu didn't care. He wanted this position before only because it was what he should have. Instead of letting others take it, it was better to hold it firmly in his own hands. He said that you are the only legitimate son of the Count of Zhenbei's residence. Logically speaking, this position should be yours. Not only Shang Junlin, but also the ministers who heard Count of Zhenbei's words in the morning court showed a strange expression. They really didn't understand why Count of Zhenbei suddenly said this. If he really wanted to appoint a legitimate son as the heir, why didn't he mention it before Zhenbei entered the palace for more than 10 years? He only mentioned it after Zhenbei entered the palace and was favored by the emperor. Many people looked at Count of Zhenbei with strange eyes. Didn't Count of Zhenbei feel it? How could he not feel the undisguised gaze? Even Shang Junlin's gaze on him was like a needle on a carpet. "Count of Zhenbei, are you joking with me by mentioning it at this time?" Everyone could feel the anger under Shang Junlin's calm tone. Count of Zhenbei hurriedly knelt down. I don't dare. It's just that this position should be his. I was obsessed in the past. I doted on my concubine and son and neglected Xiao Yu. I want to take advantage of the opportunity now to make up for my past mistakes one by one. Shang Junlin looked at him condescendingly. He didn't agree or refuse. Count of Zhenbei still wanted to say something, but Shang Junlin interrupted him. Now Yu is my Count of Zhenbei's residence. Count of Zhenbei's residence is his past. I don't care how you suddenly came up with this idea. Whether it's sincere or not. Directly refused. The ministers couldn't understand what was happening in front of Zhenbei. After the court Zhenbei's residence, they couldn't help but talk about it. Count of Zhenbei? Why did he say he wants to appoint the heir at this time? If he really wanted to have a legitimate son, he would have done so a long time ago. The heir he originally wanted was that bastard who sided with outsiders. Could it be that he regretted it? What's the use of regretting now? She has already been sent to the palace by him. It is even more unrealistic to ask His Majesty to let her go now. Not to mention how much His Majesty is favored now, even if she is an unfavored concubine, there is no reason to do this. That's right. Given how much His Majesty favors His Majesty probably doesn't care about the position of Crown Prince. If His Majesty really cared about this, he wouldn't have entered the palace in the first place. No one could understand Duke Zhenbei's sudden action. Even the officials who had a good relationship with Duke Zhenbei were confused. I didn't promise him. Yu can only be tied to me from now on. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand and sat down on the soft couch. Even if His Majesty agrees, I can't agree. From the moment I entered the palace, I had nothing to do with the residence of Count North. However, Shen Yu was also very curious about why Duke Zhenbei would do this. Did something happen to Count North's mansion recently? Except for this, Shen Yu couldn't think of any other reason. No, except for some small disputes, Count North's mansion is as usual. Shang Junlin wouldn't lie to him about this kind of thing. Shen Yu ruled out this possibility. Since nothing happened to Count North's mansion, why did Duke Zhenbei suddenly ask for the position of Crown Prince for him? In fact, Duke Zhenbei was right about one thing. The position of Crown Prince originally belonged to Shen Yu. If Duke Zhenbei didn't favor Shen Qingran and his mother and didn't want to give him the position of Crown Prince, he would have been the legitimate Crown Prince of Count North's mansion. A few days later, news came from Count North's mansion that Duke Zhenbei was looking for a wife for Shen Qingran. Shen Qingran and Shen Yu were about the same age. They were indeed old enough to look for a wife. First, Duke Zhenbei asked Shen Yu to be the Crown Prince. Then, Duke Zhenbei asked for Shen Qingran's marriage. Was there any connection between the two? Which family did Duke Zhenbei show Shen Qingran? Shen Yu asked as he rubbed the wall of his cup. It's the daughter of the collateral branch of the Duan family. Shang Junlin told him the news that the hidden dragon guards found out. There are also the daughters of the Yi family and the Chen family. Without exception, they were all girls from the aristocratic families in the capital. Perhaps Duke Zhenbei didn't choose the girls from the province, but the power behind them. Marriage alliance. This kind of thing was very common in aristocratic families. Shen Yu didn't find it strange that Duke Zhenbei would choose marriage alliance. But the person of marriage alliance was Shen Qingran. They are all willing to marry their daughters to Shen Qingran. Although he is the son of a concubine, he is the only person in the Duke Zhenbei's mansion who has the possibility of inheriting the Duke Zhenbei's mansion. Moreover, he has Yu as his legitimate brother. It is normal for these people to be tempted. Shang Junlin was right. Not everyone knew about the grudge between Shen Yu and the Duke Zhenbei's mansion. In the eyes of outsiders, although Shen Yu and the Duke Zhenbei's mansion weren't close, they weren't at the point of killing each other. No matter what happened in between, it couldn't change the fact that he was the legitimate son of Duke Zhenbei. Even fewer people knew about the grudge between him and Shen Qingran. Before entering the palace, Shen Yu lived in seclusion and didn't have a strong presence in the capital. Shen Qingran wasn't stupid enough to go around telling everyone how he bullied his legitimate brother in the Duke Zhenbei's mansion. Duke Zhenbei's mansion. After many days, Duke Shunbei once again stepped into Shen Qingran's courtyard. After being locked up for a period of time, Shen Qingran was much more well-behaved. 2 months ago, Duke Shunbei lifted his confinement. He could move freely in the mansion, but he couldn't leave the mansion. Shen Qingran also understood that Duke Shunbei didn't have any old affection for his father. When you were useful to him, he would treat you well. When you were useless, he would kick you away without any mercy. "Father, why are you here?" Shen Qingran learned how to disguise himself after bumping into a wall so many times. "You have reached the age of marriage. I have looked at a few girls for you. You can choose by yourself." Duke Shunbei raised his hand. The manservant behind him carried a list of names and put it on the table. Shen Qingran almost couldn't maintain the expression on his face. "Father, are you here for this? Your brother has been in the palace for a year. You should also get married. After you get married, you can have children for the mansion as soon as possible." The meaning of Duke Shunbei's words was very obvious. Shen Qingran's face showed a strange expression. "Father, you know that I like men." Duke Shunbei waved his hand impatiently. "I just want you to marry a legal wife. You are the only one in the mansion now. After you give birth to a child, you can like whoever you want." "Father, you are right." Shen Qingran glanced at the list on the table. "I will read it carefully. They are all girls with good family backgrounds. You should hurry up and choose, so that I can reply to the girl's family as soon as possible." After Duke Shunbei left, Shen Qingran walked to the table and sat down. He slowly opened the list. Duke Shunbei didn't lie to him. The girls with names in the list all had good family backgrounds. Seriously, Shen Qingran would be climbing up the social ladder if he married these girls. The news of Duke Shunbei's mansion spread to the palace. Mu Shi knew that Shun Yu had been paying attention to what happened in Duke Shunbei's mansion recently. She immediately told Shun Yu when she got the news. Shun Yu asked them to continue paying attention. In Hanju, because of the arrival of King Yu's group, there was no New Year's atmosphere. King Yu was now living in the Cheng family's mansion. The Cheng family only knew what kind of boat they were tied to after King Yu's arrival. It wasn't that no one was dissatisfied, but they had no other choice but to follow King Yu. The situation outside was tense, and King Yu wasn't in the mood to celebrate. Compared to this, he hoped that the people Mr. Tan mentioned could come quickly. He really didn't want to be trapped here anymore. "Mr. Tan, how long will it take for the people you said to come to our rescue?" "They have already arrived. They are in the mountains behind Hanju. They have to wait for a suitable time to attack from both inside and outside and break out of the encirclement." Hearing this, King Yu's heart slowly fell. "Where are my people? Did Mr. Tan come to their rescue?" According to Mr. Tan, the reason why the people came so late was to take a detour to bring the forces that King Yu left in his fief over. "Don't worry, Your Highness. They are already on their way." King Yu knew that what he did would bring big trouble. Before he was 100% sure, he was very careful not to let the imperial court notice that something was wrong. It was convenient for them at this time. The imperial court didn't know where King Yu's forces were. Those people were hidden very well. Even if they sent people to Yuju, they wouldn't be able to find them in a short time. Mr. Tan took the tea from the maid and took a sip. "There is one more thing. Recently, my people received a special cooperation invitation. Is Your Highness interested?" King Yu: "Oh? Mr. Tan, it is from the Northern Desert. They said that there is a person who is willing to help Your Highness." King Yu: "People from the Northern Desert? Weren't they just defeated by the Northern Army?" Mr. Tan kept him in suspense. "Yes and no. When the time comes, Your Highness will know." King Yu had no other choice. If he wanted to have the strength to fight Shang Junlin, he didn't have enough people in his hands. He didn't have time to think about why these people were helping him. He just wanted to change his current situation as soon as possible. He didn't want to be suppressed by Shang Junlin. One day, Shang Junlin would be his defeated opponent. The humiliation he suffered would be returned 1,000 times. "Young master, the people we sent to Hanju have sent back news. King Yu seems to have 2 forces in contact." At noon, Mu Shi came in with warm water. Shun Yu washed his hands and used a handkerchief to dry them. "I know. Pay more attention to that side. It would be best if we can find out where the forces in contact with them are. This servant understands. She handed the basin to the palace servant and continued, Junbei who sent a letter to you again. Do you want to meet him? Since Shun Yu entered the palace, Junbei who had sent many letters to the palace. Every month, he would write 3 times a month. Except for a few times, Shun Yu would pretend that he didn't see it. Junbei who was furious, but he couldn't do anything if he didn't see him. This time, for some reason, Junbei who had been sending letters to the palace for several days. The messenger said that Junbei who had something important to discuss with His Highness and hoped that His Highness would agree. Shun Yu was curious about what Junbei who wanted to do. After pondering for a moment, he said, yes. If Shun Yu wanted to meet Junbei who, he could just call him into the palace. Before meeting him, Shun Yu told Shang Junlin that Shang Junlin wanted to accompany him. Shun Yu felt that if Shang Junlin was here, Junbei who wouldn't say a lot of things. Your Majesty, do you want to leave first? I want to know what Junbei who wants to say to me. Am I so shameful? Shang Junlin pinched Shun Yu's face. Shun Yu slapped his hand away. Your Majesty, you know that's not what I mean. Then, give me a kiss, and I'll do whatever you want. Shun Yu glanced at him and gave him a perfunctory kiss on his face. Shang Junlin was not satisfied, but he was pushed into the inner room by Shun Yu. I've kissed you. Your Majesty, please wait here for a while. When Junbei who arrived, he only saw Shun Yu sitting on the main seat. What does Master who want to say to me? I wrote a letter to ask for the title of heir apparent for you, but it was rejected by Your Majesty. Junbei who knew that Shun Yu didn't like to talk nonsense, so he went straight to the point. Did Junbei who come here for this? Shun Yu said casually. It seemed that he didn't care about this matter at all. Junbei who was stunned. After a while, he said, I chose a wife for Shen Qingran from a famous family. When his first child is born, he will be adopted under your name. He will inherit the title of Marquis Mansion in the future. Shun Yu couldn't help but laugh out loud. Don't you think you're dreaming too much? Chapter 178. Through a child, he was completely tied to the Count of Junbei. Did he really think he was stupid? Not to mention his current identity. If he adopted his child, wouldn't he also become His Majesty's child? I just want to correct the mistakes of the past. The heir of the Count of Junbei must be from the direct line of descent. I only have 2 sons in my life, but you entered the imperial palace. Shun Yu was impatient to hear him say these words. Didn't you want to make Shen Qingran the heir of Junbei before? It's the same to make him the heir now. How can it be the same? Count of Junbei was a little anxious. Only you are the only legitimate son of the Count of Junbei. It turns out that you also know that only I am the legitimate son. Shun Yu sneered. When concubine Are Yu and her son were in power, you didn't say so. I thought that in your heart, whether you are the legitimate son or not is not important at all. I know that you have been blaming me for the past. I don't dare. If Count of Junbei only comes for this matter, I advise you not to make trouble and don't harm other people's good girls. No matter what plan you have in mind, I won't agree to the adoption. Count of Junbei was a little embarrassed when he was rejected by Shun Yu mercilessly. I know that you don't like Shen Qingran. When the child is born, I will make sure that Shen Qingran never appears in front of you, and the child will not know who his biological father is. Let me tell you this. In fact, I don't want to continue my bloodline at all, and I don't want to have a child for no reason. Now I am a noble. Count of Junbei, have you thought about what this means? It means that my child will also be His Majesty's child. Why do you think that the courtiers are willing to see His Majesty have a child who is not related to his bloodline? You don't want a legitimate heir, but an heir who can have a relationship with His Majesty because of me. Shun Yu looked directly at Duke Junbei, as if he wanted to see through his heart. Marquis Junbei's face turned red. He really thought so. He didn't want the power of Marquis Junbei to fall into the hands of others. The only candidates he could choose were Shun Yu and Shen Qingran. He originally wanted to ask Shun Yu to be the heir and find a way to adopt a child for him. In the future, this child would inherit the Marquis manor. However, His Majesty didn't agree. He could only skip this step and directly jump to the next step. The matter of appointing Shen Qingran as the heir was no longer within the scope of his consideration. Not to mention that Shen Qingran's identity as a concubine's son could not inherit the Lord Protector's manor. Even if he could, Count North Marquis would not be willing to hand over the Lord Protector's manor to him. What he wanted was for the Lord Protector's manor to become better and better. He didn't want the Lord Protector's manor to become someone else's. Father, this is for your own good. Since ancient times, emperors have been fickle. Don't look at how you are favored by the emperor now. Can you guarantee that he will still treat you like this 5 years later or 10 years later? In addition to the emperor's favor, you also need to find yourself someone to rely on. This is between His Majesty and me. Count North Marquis, you don't need to worry about it. Count North Marquis looked at Shun Yu as if he was looking at an ignorant child. Your Majesty should also think more for yourself. You are the legitimate son. You should inherit the Lord Protector's manor. Since Count North Marquis also said that I should inherit the Lord Protector's manor, then why didn't I say anything before I entered the palace? Shun Yu interrupted him again. Count North Marquis was blocked and had nothing to say. Because at that time, his mind was full of thinking about how to give the position of heir to Shen Qingran. If I said that I regretted it, would your Majesty believe me? Of course, why not? After I entered the palace, Count North Marquis should have seen clearly what kind of person Shen Qingran is. Do you think that the Lord Protector's manor will be finished in his hands sooner or later? At this time, you will think of your eldest son who was abandoned by you. Comparing the two, the advantage of the legitimate son is more obvious. Regret was the easiest emotion for people to have. It was also the most helpless emotion. I know that it is too late to say anything now. But today's matter is not something that your Majesty can say no to. The heir of the Lord Protector's manor must be from the legitimate line of descent. According to the law of Da Huan, whether Shun Yu entered the palace or not, Shen Qingran was not qualified to inherit the Lord Protector's manor. Count North Marquis only had one legitimate son, Shen Yu. If Shun Yu could not inherit the Lord Protector's manor, he could only choose from the next generation of Shen Yu. From a certain point of view, what Count North Marquis said was also true. Count North Marquis is old but vigorous. It is not a problem for you to have another legitimate son. Before I entered the palace, I also said that I can ask His Majesty to grant me a marriage. Compared to what I said before, isn't it better for you to have one yourself? Shun Yu did not hide his sarcasm in his tone. Count North Marquis was so angry that his neck turned red. He thought that Shun Yu would not agree, but he did not expect that Shun Yu would treat him so harshly. When did this situation start? Count North Marquis was in a trance for a moment. It seemed that he woke up after fainting when he heard that he was going to enter the palace. Is this how you talk to your father? Count North Marquis's expression changed a few times. Am I not telling the truth? If you want someone to inherit the Lord Protector's manor, it is better to have another legitimate son. Then you can save the step of adopting him. Shun Yu was smiling, but there was no smile in his eyes. You. Count North Marquis's words were stuck in his throat. Shong Junlin came out from behind the screen. His voice was unclear whether he was happy or angry. I didn't know that Count North Marquis was still thinking about adopting a child for Gui Jun. I dare not. Count North Marquis suddenly knelt down. His back was covered with sweat. He did not know when Shong Junlin came and how much he had heard of the conversation. But he knew that from this moment on, his plan was doomed to fail. Even if you are Guijuan's father, I don't want you to intervene in our private affairs. Do you understand? I understand. I crossed the line. Please forgive me, Your Majesty. Count North Marquis's forehead touched the ground. His heart seemed to be clenched by a big hand. Under the high tension, his breathing began to be irregular. Under the heavy pressure, he could not even raise his head to look at Shong Junlin's expression. I have said before that since Gui Jun entered the palace, he is my man. He has nothing to do with your manor of Count North. He will not be the heir of the manor of Count North, nor will he inherit the title of Count North Marquis. This time, because you are Guijuan's father, I will not blame you for sowing discord between me and Gui Jun in front of Gui Jun. I don't want to see the same thing happen again. Yes, yes, I dare not do it again. Get out. Count North Marquis did not dare to stay for a moment and got out. Why is your majesty angrier than me? Shun Yu smoothed the wrinkles between Shang Junlin's eyebrows. The unhappiness caused by Count North Marquis in his heart quickly dissipated. Shang Junlin held Shun Yu in his arms without saying a word. The man's high body temperature warmed Shun Yu. After a while, Shang Junlin whispered, I will never change the way I treat you. The next day, Shang Junlin directly took away Count North Marquis's position in the imperial court. The ministers did not know why. Later, they faintly heard that His Majesty did this because Count North Marquis made Gui Jun unhappy. Shang Junlin heard what Count North Marquis said that day. This position-taking was a warning to him. He thought that he would be able to rise again one day. However, he did not know that the ending of Count North Marquis's manor had already been written by Shun Yu. They were only waiting for the last moment to come. Time passed slowly. Ji Yu Hui set off from Subei with his men. They were getting closer and closer to the capital. Reporting to General, there are traces of unknown forces ahead. Ji Yu Hui pulled the reins to stop the horse. Send someone to take a look. When he was in Subei, Ji Yu Hui received news about Hanju City. He also knew that there might be unknown forces in other places aside from Hanju City. He brought 5,000 men with him. If they encountered the rebels along the way, it would be best if they could deal with them directly. The scout that was sent out soon returned. Based on the initial analysis, there are 2,000 people ahead. They are heading towards Hanju City. General, what should we do now? Ji Yu Hui briefly pondered. First, determine their origin. If they are with King Yu, deal with them on the spot. Yes. It took some time to deal with the 2,000 people. He had no idea if it was because of the path that they chose. Ever since they encountered the first batch of King Yu's men, they would encounter them one after another. Under the moonlight, Ji Yu Hui wiped his sword. The adjutant took a sip of water and said, according to this speed, we won't be able to reach the capital on time. Will the imperial court be unhappy with us for bringing our men out? The adjutant's worries weren't unfounded. Although 5,000 men wasn't a lot, it wasn't a small number either. The imperial court had given them plenty of time. If it wasn't for dealing with King Yu's men, they wouldn't have wasted so much time. There's no need to worry. Ji Yu Hui came to Subei as a hidden dragon guard, so he had a method to contact the hidden dragon guards. When he discovered that the first batch might be King Yu's men, he had contacted the hidden dragon guards. The news should have reached the capital by now. But it was a pity. He initially thought that he could spend the new year with his brother. Ji Yu Hui encountered King Yu's men. Shang Junlin closed the letter and placed it on the table. On the way back from Subei? Yes, and it's not just one batch. He suspects that there are other forces heading towards Hanju City as well. Since they had discovered them, there was no reason for them to let them go. Shang Junlin instructed Ji Yu Hui to provide support, and it would be best if they could clean up the path. Along the way, Ji Yu Hui's men increased, and the number of rebels that he dealt with increased. Bang! The vase fell to the ground with a loud bang. We can't wait any longer. The people we've been hiding in the dark have been discovered. Mr. Tan looked anxious. Aside from the 100,000 men in Hanju City, how many are there outside? Can they help us break out of the encirclement? After venting his anger, the viciousness on King Yu's face dissipated. There are 80,000 of them that we can use right now. As for the rest, we can't wait any longer. Mr. Tan initially wanted to wait for those people to arrive before making a move. But now that a mysterious force had wiped out a few of their strongholds, it was only a matter of time before the rest were discovered. The snow was getting heavier. As the snow fell, the patrolling soldiers suddenly felt that something was amiss and sounded the alarm. The gates of Hanju City that had been closed for many days opened and archers stood on the city walls. Release the arrows. The sound of swords rang out for a long time. The news was quickly sent to the capital. It looks like Ji Yu Hui's actions have disrupted their plans. Shun Yu slowly sat beside Shang Junlin. Ji Yu Hui has made a great contribution this time. I have ordered him to bring his men to Hanju City. Calculating the time, they should arrive in a few days. King Yu stood on the city walls and looked at the flames of war below with a smile. They were about to win. The Great Huan army that was guarding Hanju City did not expect that King Yu's men would be hiding outside, so they were caught unprepared. Chapter 179. There were no signs before Hanju City launched their attack. If it wasn't for the soldiers that were prepared, they would have suffered a great loss. The disparity in strength between the two sides wasn't great, and the situation was in a stalemate until another unknown force joined the battle and attacked the Great Huan army from the back. Being attacked from the front and back, the Great Huan army was caught off guard and fell into a disadvantage. The appearance of the first unknown force seemed to have flipped a switch, and for the next few days, more and more soldiers appeared. The imperial court estimated that the King of Yu had 100,000 soldiers, and the soldiers that came to encircle the Great Huan army was based on that number. But now, a bunch of people that were loyal to the King of Yu had appeared out of nowhere, and the Great Huan army couldn't hold on any longer. General, we can't go on like this. We have to report this to the imperial court. We have already reported it, and the imperial court has also sent someone over. But it will take some time for them to arrive. We have to hold on during this period. Yes. War was never a game, and the Hanju city that was engulfed in the war was practically destroyed. Roars and cries rang out endlessly. The snow was cold, but the blood was warm. Countless people fell, and countless people stood up. Behind them were their citizens, and they had to use themselves to build the strongest city wall. When the news reached the imperial court, it caused a huge commotion. Didn't they say that there were only 100,000 soldiers? What's with the extra 100,000? Send reinforcements. We can't let the King of Yu succeed. Countless orders were sent out, and they were executed at the fastest speed. At this moment, everyone was standing on the same battle line. Yu Huai received a secret order from the hidden dragon guards along with a tiger tally that could be used to mobilize troops along the way. Now, it was handed over to Yu Huai by Shang Junlin. When Yu Huai left Subei, he brought 5,000 soldiers with him, and now, he had no less than 100,000 soldiers. Not many people in the imperial court knew that Shang Junlin wanted him to change the route to Hanju City. On the surface, Shang Junlin even sent another general over to provide reinforcements. The sudden war broke the festive atmosphere of the new year. For a moment, the entire capital became solemn. To prevent any accidents from happening in the capital, they had to leave a sufficient garrison in the capital, and the number of people that could be sent out was limited. Compared to transferring troops from the capital, Shang Junlin was more inclined to transfer troops from the vicinity of Hanju City. During this period of time, Shang Junlin had been very busy. The time he spent in Yuzhong Palace was greatly reduced. If he was not discussing matters in the imperial court, he was discussing matters in the imperial study. Young master, are you not worried? Mu Shi vaguely knew a little about the grudge between his young master and the King of Yu. Now that the King of Yu had rebelled, not to mention the ministers, even the palace servants were somewhat uneasy. On the other hand, Shun Yu was still the same as before. There's nothing to worry about. I believe in your majesty. Shun Yu fiddled with the leaves of the junling and didn't even raise his head. After being placed in the bedroom for a few days, the junling regained its vitality and was no longer listless. Shun Yu moved it back to the greenhouse, but it started to wilt again after 2 days. Shun Yu had no choice but to bring it back to the bedroom. They have already investigated the matter that young master instructed them to investigate. There are some clues now. One of the connections between the King of Yu and the outside world is connected to the northern desert, and the other one has yet to be found. Sure enough, the King of Yu has formed a relationship with the northern desert. Are there any northern desert people among the troops that came to Hanju City? Currently, there aren't any. The news that came from the other side is that both sides have yet to reach an agreement. It's a good thing for the Great Huan Kingdom. The northern desert couldn't even take care of themselves, so how could they be in the mood to help the King of Yu? The reason was that the Emperor of the northern desert wanted to send troops to help the King of Yu, but the other members of the royal family didn't agree. Seeing that they couldn't persuade the emperor, they simply contacted the ministers who didn't agree and killed the emperor. Now that the northern desert was fighting for the throne, they couldn't find the time to get involved in the Great Huan Kingdom's matter. The mastermind behind the scenes didn't expect such a change in the middle of the process. His men finally convinced the former emperor of the northern desert to send troops, but they were killed in the blink of an eye. He was also imprisoned because of this. This chess piece was completely useless. The King of Yu and Mr. Tan, who were in Hanju City, were still waiting for the northern desert's reply. Unfortunately, no matter how many letters they sent out, there was no reply. Fortunately, they didn't place their hopes in the northern desert, so the lack of reply didn't affect them much. After waiting for a long time, the King of Yu finally saw his subordinates. His confidant also came with him. "I finally see the king." In the study room, the confidant bowed to the King of Yu. "Everyone, please rise." The King of Yu first expressed his concern before asking about the situation in Yuju. Fortunately, His Highness sent people there in time. If they were late, we would have been trapped in Yuju. The officials sent by the imperial court this time were very difficult to get rid of. If it weren't for Mr. Minute and Mr. Tang, we wouldn't have been able to get out. What about them? The King of Yu had a vague idea in his heart, but he held on to a tiny bit of hope that he was wrong. They stayed in Yuju so that we could leave smoothly. If they stayed at this time, it would only end in disaster. The study room fell into a long silence, and some people's eyes turned red. After a long time, the King of Yu said in a hoarse voice, "I will remember the kindness of the two gentlemen. One day, I will avenge the two gentlemen." It was time for Imperial Physician Ji Yu to take Shun Yu's pulse again. Shun Yu was recuperating well and his body was much better than before. He also took less medicine. Although it couldn't be cured for the time being, Shun Yu was very satisfied with the result. After taking the pulse, Imperial Physician Ji Yu adjusted the prescription slightly. The new prescription is to take it once every 2 days. After a while, you can stop taking medicine. Nothing made Shun Yu happier than this sentence. After his rebirth, he had taken medicine for almost a year. He felt that the medicine was going to be salted soon. "Thank you, Imperial Physician Ji Yu. Mushi, bring the small box I prepared earlier and give it to Imperial Physician Ji Yu." Mushi obeyed. After a while, she came back with a small box. "Take it as a thank you for taking care of me for the past year. This is a small token of my appreciation. You must accept it. You don't have to. His Majesty and you have given me many rewards. This is my duty. You don't have to do this." In the end, Imperial Physician Ji Yu accepted Shun Yu's gift. Thinking of Junling, who had been acting strangely recently, Shun Yu told Imperial Physician Ji Yu about its situation. I have never encountered such a situation. Let me go back and check if I can find out the reason." When Shong Junlin came back, the sky was already dark. Shun Yu was writing something under the lamp. He stopped the palace servant from reporting and slowly walked over. Shun Yu heard the footsteps and raised his head. "His Majesty is back. What is you doing?" When he came closer, he found that the paper in front of Shun Yu was full of his name. Shong Junlin was stunned. Shun Yu lowered his head and looked at the paper full of Shong Junlin. His face turned red. He was distracted just now. Without realizing it, he wrote so many names of Shong Junlin. Now, it was seen by the person himself. Shun Yu panicked and tried to cover up the evidence of his crime. His hand was grabbed by the man. Shong Junlin rescued the paper from Shun Yu's hand and put it aside to dry. The ink on the paper was not dry yet. Shun Yu was a little dizzy because of his actions just now. He only had time to say one word. Shun Yu's eyes suddenly widened. He felt a warm touch on his lips. The man's kiss was fierce and urgent. It was as if he wanted to swallow him whole. The tip of his teeth touched his soft lips. There was a tingling pain and a faint smell of blood. The blood droplets were swept away by the tip of his tongue. Tasting the blood, the man's movements became gentler. His waist was tightly held. The man's other hand covered the back of his head. Shun Yu couldn't escape. He was forced to raise his head and accept the man's deepening kiss. It was as if a large number of white flowers exploded in front of his eyes. All of his senses were focused on his lips. He felt that his lips were being crushed. The pain where he was bitten disappeared and another feeling came. After a long time, Xunyu was finally released. His vision turned black and he had to rely on the man's strength to stand firm. Xunyu leaned his forehead on the man's shoulder. He slowly calmed down his breathing. The man's breathing was a little heavier than usual. One of his hands was wrapped around Xunyu's waist. The other hand, which was originally placed behind Xunyu's head, moved to the side of Xunyu's face. He rubbed the skin on the side of Xunyu's face. "That piece of paper, give it to me." "What does your majesty want that for?" Xunyu just wanted to destroy the evidence. Naturally, he wanted to collect it. Shang Junlin didn't answer. He turned his head and kissed Xunyu's forehead. "Can I?" The man's voice was low and magnetic. It was Xunyu's favorite voice. Xunyu was muddle-headed and agreed. After receiving the order, Eunuch Meng carefully put away the paper on the table. When Xunyu came back to his senses, the paper was gone. Shang Junlin took the initiative to talk about a topic to divert Xunyu's attention. "There is news from the Northern Desert. The Emperor of the Northern Desert is dead. He was killed." Xunyu's attention was diverted. He didn't want to know where the paper with Shang Junlin's name went. The Emperor of the Northern Desert wasn't old or sick. If he died in this place, the biggest possibility was that he was killed. Yes. Now that several members of the royal family who are qualified to inherit the throne are fighting, I want to make the water more muddy. The civil strife in the Northern Desert is a good opportunity. If we can get rid of the King of Yu as soon as possible, Your Majesty might get a Northern Desert kingdom. Civil strife consumed a lot of the country's power. The Northern Desert had just experienced a failed invasion and needed to pay a large sum of compensation to the Great Huan Kingdom. Before they had time to recuperate, they encountered another civil strife. If they didn't do something at this time, it would be a waste of this God-given opportunity. It was time to settle the matter of the King of Yu. Hanju. With twice the number of troops, the scales of victory gradually tilted towards the King of Yu. The temporary victory restored the King of Yu's confidence. His mental state looked similar to before he was locked in the dark prison, but his style of doing things was more ruthless. "Today is the last battle. We will break through the blockade of the imperial court and start a new journey." The King of Yu looked at the soldiers standing neatly below. His heart was filled with pride. Soon, his wish would come true. Charge. Everything was as the King of Yu expected. The Great Huan Kingdom's army was attacked from the front and the back. They were no match for the Great Huan Kingdom's army. The King of Yu was protected on the city wall. He didn't need to come, but he wanted to see the moment the Great Huan Kingdom's army was defeated. It would be soon. The smile on the King of Yu's face grew bigger and bigger. Suddenly, the smile on his face froze. He saw that even further away, there were thousands of soldiers and horses galloping over. He turned his head and looked at Mr. Tan, whose face had turned ugly. His voice trembled. "Are they also here to help us?" Chapter 180. Mr. Tan's expression had already explained everything. King Yu felt as if he was thrown into a bottomless abyss. A chill rose from the bottom of his heart and spread throughout his body. His hot-bloodedness from before instantly turned cold. King Yu refused to accept the truth before him. Just when he thought that he had seen the light, someone slammed the window shut and told him that it was all fake. No one could accept that. King Yu unconsciously tightened his grip on Mr. Tan's shoulder. Feeling the pain, Mr. Tan pushed his hand away. "Get them to retreat first and close the gate." It wasn't that they wanted to retreat, but the army had forced them to retreat and find another way out. King Yu gnashed his teeth. He wasn't willing to give up just like that. "We can't retreat. If we're trapped in the city again, we won't have any chance. We have to end this quickly and break out of the encirclement as soon as possible." Mr. Tan briefly pondered and felt that King Yu's words were reasonable. They couldn't be trapped in Hanju City, or they might die here. This was their only chance. As they spoke, the people below also noticed that something was amiss. Is someone coming? Our men? Or the imperial court? Not only were the soldiers under King Yu, but the imperial court's army was also the same. When the battle started, they knew that King Yu had a backup plan, but they didn't expect the other party to be so much stronger than them. The general had already written a request for help from the imperial court. The reason why they waited until now was to delay King Yu and wait for reinforcements. After fighting for so long, they could no longer hold on. If the imperial court still didn't send reinforcements, King Yu might be able to break out of the encirclement today. General, there are traces of a large number of troops nearby. The man who was addressed as the general grabbed onto his sword and asked, "Are they our men or King Yu's men?" As soon as he finished speaking, the surrounding people all held their breaths. Many times in the past, after they heard such reports, King Yu's forces would grow stronger. From being able to crush the other party in the beginning to being evenly matched, it only took less than a month for them to be crushed by the other party. They wished that they could hear a different answer. "General, it's the imperial court's army." The soldier couldn't conceal the excitement on his face. Hearing his words, everyone felt relieved. When everyone looked at the general, they saw that there wasn't any trace of relaxation on his face and his brows were tightly knitted. "General, don't let your guard down. Carefully confirm the other party's identity." Yes. The general's words cleared their minds. They recalled what had happened not long ago. The King of Yu's men had disguised themselves as soldiers of the imperial court to get close to them. If not for the general's timely reaction, they might have already been killed by the enemy. Yu Huai brought his men closer. Everyone saw the flag they were holding high. It was the symbol of Da Huan. The people sent by His Majesty have arrived. Yu Huai's arrival completely reversed the situation on the battlefield. Like a landslide, the dark clouds that shrouded the sky above Hanju City had finally dispersed. Before the new year, the imperial court received news that the rebels had been executed. The King of Yu escaped under the cover of his trusted aides. Before they could get far, Yu Huai's men caught up with them and captured them. In this battle, Yu Huai had once again made a great contribution. As one of the commanders, Yu Huai rode at the front of the group when they returned to the capital. The citizens of the capital lined the streets to welcome them. They had already received the news of the King of Yu's defeat from the newspapers. The King of Yu, Mr. Tan, and the rest were locked up in prison wagons, attracting countless rotten eggs and leaves. The King of Yu blankly looked at everything before him. It wasn't easy for him to escape from the capital, but he came back in such a sorry state. The difference in his heart was too great, and he no longer knew what expression he should show. A rotten egg smashed into his head with a bang and broke. A disgusting stench instantly overflowed. In the beginning, the King of Yu was still unhappy and frowned. But now, he no longer had any expression when facing this. Along the way, he could only hear the disdain directed at him. The ones responsible for escorting the King of Yu's group back to the capital were the 5,000 troops that Yu Huai brought back from the Subei province. The troops that the imperial court sent to Hanju City were temporarily left there to deal with the aftermath. To show the importance of a meritorious official returning to the capital, the imperial court would send officials to receive them. If the meritorious service was great enough, the emperor would personally receive them. This time, Yu Huai had rendered meritorious service twice, and even turned the tide to capture the King of Yu. The imperial court had to pay attention to him. On the day that Yu Huai brought people back, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin changed into casual clothes and left the palace. In the restaurant and tea house, everyone was talking about the King of Yu. This time, Shen Yu and Shang Junlin didn't choose the Yingxing Tower. Instead, they chose another tea house and asked for a private room on the second floor by the window. It was convenient for them to observe the situation outside. They chose the place that Yu Huai's group had to pass through after entering the capital. Shun Yu poured tea for himself and pushed a cup in front of Shang Junlin. "The tea here is pretty good. Your Majesty, try it." This tea house was recommended by Jiang Huiqing when he wrote to him. For a long time, Shang Junlin was busy with government affairs and couldn't leave the palace. Today, he was free. Under Shun Yu's invitation, he came out with him. Shang Junlin picked up the teacup and took a sip, I still prefer a Yu's cooking. Shen Yu knew a lot of things. The art of tea had accompanied him for 2 lifetimes. In his previous life, he was alone and liked to make tea for himself. In this life, there was one more person, Shang Junlin, so he made tea for Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin was used to drinking the tea made by Shen Yu, so he couldn't accept the tea made by others. Shen Yu looked at the sky. There was still time, so he asked the waiter to bring the tea set. I'm just saying. A Yu doesn't have to do it himself. Shang Junlin saw this and hurriedly pressed down his hand. It's fine. I also prefer to drink tea made by myself. Shen Yu didn't say this to appease Shang Junlin. He really thought so. When he was in the palace, he liked to do it himself. Shang Junlin saw that Shen Yu was interested, so he asked eunuch Meng to pick a lot of treasured tea sets and send them to Yuzhong Palace. Shen Yu's movements were natural and smooth. His light blue clothes danced with his movements. He looked down and focused on the white porcelain teacup in his hand. Shang Junlin's gaze fell on him and couldn't move away. Shang Junlin was worried that Shen Yu would be hungry, so he ordered a lot of snacks. They were all sweets that Shen Yu liked. Shang Junlin took a piece of snack and fed it to Shen Yu. Shen Yu took a bite. A faint tea fragrance spread in his mouth. He said in surprise, "Are there tea leaves in this snack?" It had the fragrance of tea, but it didn't have the bitterness of tea. Instead, it was sweet and lingered in his mouth. A special method is used to leave the fragrance of tea in the snack and filter out the bitterness. It's a very famous snack here. The sun gradually set in the west. More and more people gathered on the street. Shen Yu and the others chose a very good position. They had a wide field of vision and could see everything below. Are we almost there? Shen Yu put down the teacup and looked outside. As soon as he finished speaking, he heard the sound of horse hooves not far away. Shen Yu leaned forward and looked in the direction of the sound. The soldiers wearing armor neatly walked over. The common people automatically stood on the side of the road and made way for them. Shen Yu could hear the discussions and cheers coming from below. They were rejoicing for Da Huan's victory and cheering for the brave soldiers. Shen Yu unconsciously smiled and sat back in his seat. Ji Yu Huai and the others were very fast. In less than a moment, they had arrived at the tea house. Shen Yu saw Ji Yu Huai sitting high on the back of the horse. The current Ji Yu Huai was more determined than before. Shen Yu's eyes were more similar to the person in his memory. Shen Yu couldn't help but think of his previous life. What had Ji Yu Huai encountered before he met him? Shen Yu's gaze fell on Ji Yu Huai for a long time. Shang Junlin discontentedly pinched his chin and saw the sadness in his eyes. What is you thinking about? Shang Junlin uncontrollably increased the strength of his fingers. His voice had a hint of hostility that his master hadn't noticed. Shen Yu pulled back from the memory of his previous life. He felt some pain in his chin. Your Majesty, you're hurting me. Shang Junlin released Shen Yu's chin as if he had just woken up from a dream. Unsurprisingly, there were 2 shocking red marks on Shen Yu's chin. Does it hurt? The hostility in his heart instantly dissipated. Shang Junlin carefully lifted Shen Yu's chin and touched it with his fingertips. Shen Yu shook his head. Out of the corner of his eyes, he caught a glimpse of the King of Yu who was locked in the prisoner carriage. This time, Your Majesty wants to punish the King of Yu. No one will jump out and say that it was the order of the late emperor, right? As if he felt something, the person in the prisoner carriage looked up and glanced over. Then, as if he was stabbed, he hurriedly looked away. The King of Yu's rebellion is already set in stone. They don't dare. Seeing the scene he wanted to see, Shen Yu was satisfied. Now that the King of Yu was arrested, Shang Junlin still had a lot of things to do. After packing some snacks, the 2 got up and returned to the palace. Habit was really a scary thing. Shen Yu used more than 10 years to get used to being alone. But now, he only used a year to get used to the existence of another person by his side. After accompanying Shen Yu in Yuzhong Palace for a while, Shang Junlin went to see Ji Yu Huai and the others. After a simple wash, Ji Yu Huai needed to enter the palace to meet the emperor. Along with him, there were several other generals who came to the capital with him. Some of them were brought back from Subei, some were recruited halfway, and some were sent to Hanju. The king of Yu and his accomplices were locked up in the Ministry of Justice's prison. The king of Yu had already rebelled. Even with the late emperor's order, no one in the imperial court dared to plead for the king of Yu this time. It was a serious crime of rebellion. Even if they had several lives, it wouldn't be enough to pay for it. No one would joke about the fate of themselves and their family. A serious crime of rebellion would go down in infamy for thousands of years. The palace held a small welcoming banquet for Jiyu Huai and the others. The important officials of the imperial court also attended. During the banquet, Shang Junlin rewarded the people who had made contributions this time. Jiyu Huai was promoted to a second-grade general, which was even higher than his original position. This time, no one raised any objections. I order you to arrest the remnants of the rebels as soon as possible. At the same time, Shang Junlin gave out a new mission. This subject obeys. After receiving the decree, Jiyu Huai returned to his seat. During this time, many officials came to curry favor with him. They could already see the future of this newly promoted general from Shang Junlin's attitude. To be able to be placed in an important position by the emperor, he would definitely have a bright future. Moreover, Jiyu Huai didn't belong to any power in the imperial court. At this time, it was better to befriend him and pull him to their side. After the banquet ended, Shang Junlin didn't return to Yuzhong Palace immediately. Instead, he went to the imperial study. The leader of the hidden dragon guards silently appeared in the imperial study. We need to know everything about Jiyu Huai, no matter how big or small. He couldn't ignore Shen Yu's gaze during the day. Chapter 181. Shen Yu didn't know what happened to Shang Junlin, but he was woken up in the middle of the night. Your Majesty. Shen Yu bit his lips and groaned, let go. No matter how Shen Yu struggled and begged for mercy, the man didn't seem to hear him. Shen Yu was furious and kicked him. Then, he was dragged back and only fell into a deep sleep when the sun rose. When he woke up, all the bones in his body felt like they had fallen apart. It was difficult to even lift a finger. His body was dry and there was a cup beside the bed. Shen Yu slowly sat up and took a sip from the cup. It was warm water with honey. After drinking the whole cup, Shen Yu's throat felt better. He said, Mu Shi. There was a rustling sound outside. After a while, Mu Shi came in with a bowl of hot porridge. Young master, you're awake? What time is it now? It's noon. Shen Yu wasn't surprised by this result. If Shang Junlin didn't restrain himself, he would wake up at this time the next day. Shen Yu finished the porridge and put the bowl aside. Where's Her Majesty? Her Majesty is discussing matters with the ministers. The Prince of Yu was arrested, but this matter was far from over. Whether it was the Prince of Yu's own forces or the forces left to him by the previous emperor, Shang Junlin had to deal with them. The sooner he dealt with them, the better. Shen Yu couldn't get out of bed, so he asked Mu Shi to find a few storybooks to read. After reading for a while, Shen Yu felt a little uncomfortable. He put down the book. I'll sleep for a while. Mu Shi packed up her things and left. When Shang Junlin came back, the bedchamber was quiet. The palace servants were very careful and tried not to make a sound. This situation only happened when the master was sleeping. Shang Junlin took off his cloak and entered the bedchamber. The bedchamber was quiet. The doors and windows were closed, and it was slightly dim. Shang Junlin went straight to the bed and saw Shen Yu, whose face was red from sleep. For a moment, her heart softened. Shang Junlin sat beside the bed and reached out to touch Shen Yu's face. It was a little hot. Shang Junlin paused and touched Shen Yu's forehead. The temperature was indeed a little high. Shang Junlin frowned, got up and walked out. Mu Shi was waiting outside. Shang Junlin knew that she was Shen Yu's head palace maid and was very trusted by him. When did you wake up today? When did you sleep? Mu Shi answered them one by one. Did he behave strangely today? Mu Shi thought about it carefully and shook his head. What did your highness do today? Replying to your majesty, after his highness woke up, he ate a bowl of porridge and read a book for about an hour. After that, he slept. Shang Junlin calculated the time and found that Shen Yu had slept for almost 2 hours. Meng Chang, Go get Imperial Physician Gu. Imperial Physician Gu was hurriedly invited to Yuzhang Palace. Shang Junlin sat beside the bed and stroked Shen Yu's hair from time to time. His face was not very good. No need to salute. Just feel His Highness's pulse. A white hand stretched out from the bed curtain. The white skin was covered with red marks. Imperial Physician Gu only glanced at it and then looked away to focus on feeling His Highness's pulse. Your Highness has some symptoms of a cold. I will prescribe a medicine. After taking it, Your Highness will recover in 2 to 3 days. Imperial Physician Gu wrote down the prescription and a palace servant immediately took it to get the medicine. Shang Junlin carefully put Shen Yu's arm back under the quilt. Is Your Highness's body seriously injured? How did he catch a cold? Rest assured, Your Highness. Your Highness's body is fine. The cold may be because he caught a cold. It's nothing serious. As for why he caught a cold, Imperial Physician Gu did not dare to guess. Thinking of what happened last night, Shang Junlin was annoyed. After he got up, he checked Shen Yu's temperature. After confirming that he was fine, he left. After a while, he came back and found that Shen Yu had a fever. When Imperial Physician Gu recalled the red marks he had seen in a hurry, he couldn't help but say, Your Majesty, His Majesty's body can't withstand the torment. The fever this time is partly because he caught a cold, and another reason is, he did not continue and paused for a moment. If Your Highness is considerate of Your Highness's health, please restrain yourself a little. Shang Junlin's face became more and more ugly. The palace servants could not help but tremble. They did not dare to breathe loudly. Imperial Physician Gu knew that his words would anger the emperor, but it was the truth. He had to say it. In the silence where a pin drop could be heard, the chuckle from the bed curtain was unusually obvious. It instantly broke the suffocating atmosphere. In his sleep, Shen Yu vaguely heard Shang Junlin's voice. He woke up little by little and happened to hear Imperial Physician Gu's words. He could not help but laugh. Shang Junlin did not have time to be angry with Imperial Physician Gu. He quickly leaned over and asked, Are you awake? Are you feeling unwell? I'm a little thirsty. Shen Yu's voice was a little hoarse. Mu Shi, who was serving at the side, quickly came over with warm water. Shang Junlin helped Shen Yu up and let him lean on his body. He held the cup with one hand and put it next to Shen Yu's mouth. Shen Yu's body was sore and weak. He did not want to raise his hand. He drank the water in the cup with Shang Junlin's hand. His throat finally felt more comfortable. When the bed curtain was pulled open, he saw Imperial Physician Gu standing at the side. He belatedly realized that his body temperature was too high. No wonder he felt unwell. It turned out that he was sick. Imperial Physician Gu had already done what he needed to do. He did not stay to disturb the two of them. He took the medicine box and left. Shen Yu was lying in Shang Junlin's arms. His body was covered with a thick quilt. His face was abnormally red and his breath was hotter than usual. Did Your Majesty hear what Imperial Physician Gu said just now? Shen Yu joked, In the future, Your Majesty should restrain yourself more. It's my fault. Shang Junlin's tone was a little gloomy. I shouldn't have disturbed you last night. If it were not for him, Shen Yu would not have to suffer like this. What happened to Your Majesty yesterday? Shen Yu did not forget that when Shang Junlin hugged him, he repeatedly emphasized in his ear that he could only be his. He also forced him to respond again and again, cough. Shen Yu touched his burning ears. This time, it was not caused by a fever. Shang Junlin was immersed in deep self-blame and did not hear Shen Yu's words. Shen Yu waited for a long time. When he did not receive an answer, he looked up at Shang Junlin. Shen Yu was stunned when he saw the man's guilt-filled eyes. He pursed his lips. He pursed his lips. He knew his own body very well. If he hadn't taken good care of himself in the Imperial Palace, it wouldn't have been strange for him to get sick every few days. Shang Junlin had protected him too well. In the past year or so, other than a few accidents, he had almost never gotten sick. Normal people often caught colds, so he couldn't blame Shang Junlin for his illness this time. His hand was tightly held by the man under the quilt. Shen Yu tilted his head and rubbed his cheek against Shang Junlin. Your Majesty, what are you thinking about? You didn't even hear what I said. The warm and tender touch pulled Shang Junlin out of his guilty mood. He was about to say something when Shen Yu stopped him with his lips. Your Majesty, don't say anything I don't want to hear. Shen Yu's body temperature was much higher than usual. Under the touch of her soft lips, Shang Junlin forgot what he wanted to say. When Shen Yu retreated, he could not help but want to chase after her. Shen Yu could not avoid it, nor did he want to. His long eyelashes fluttered like butterfly wings, and he slowly closed his eyes. It was a kiss full of tenderness. After it was over, Shen Yu leaned on Shang Junlin's body and his breathing became heavier. Shang Junlin touched his forehead. You're sick, but you still teased me. Shen Yu snuggled into a comfortable position in his arms. Her Majesty hasn't said what happened yesterday. Although Shang Junlin liked to do that kind of thing, he would not completely ignore Shen Yu's feelings. Last night, Shang Junlin was very different from before. If he was not provoked, Shen Yu did not think that he would do such a thing. Shang Junlin's hands paused for a moment. Yesterday, you stared at Ji Yu Huai for a long time. What were you thinking at that time? Shen Yu remembered that when he and Shang Junlin were in the tea house, he saw Ji Yu Huai in full armor and thought of the Ji Yu Huai he knew in his previous life. He could not help but feel a little emotional. Your Majesty, what do you think I was thinking? Shen Yu turned over and looked into Shang Junlin's eyes, face to face. Shen Yu's gaze was as usual. Shang Junlin liked his eyes very much, especially when he saw his own reflection in them. Shang Junlin moved his hand down and covered Shen Yu's eyes. Such clear eyes reflected his own unbearable feelings. You can't think about anything. Shang Junlin's voice was slightly hoarse. Your Majesty, what are you worried about? Shen Yu roughly understood that Shang Junlin was jealous. Shen Yu was used to Shang Junlin's jealousy, but he did not know why the after-effects were so strong this time. He even made a fuss in the middle of the night. Your Majesty, you don't have to worry about anything. I can guarantee that what Your Majesty is afraid of will not happen. Other than Your Majesty, there is no other person in my heart. Shen Yu's voice was not loud, but it was powerful. Shang Junlin knew that he should trust Shen Yu, but he could not help it. Would you, who was so good, not be willing to stay for him one day? I know that I will never allow anyone to take my place. Shang Junlin moved his finger down and lifted Shen Yu's chin. You can only belong to me forever. So, last night, Your Majesty thought that I would fall in love with Ji Yu Huai. Shang Junlin did not deny it. You has always been very concerned about him. If that's the case, I also care about Prince Yu, Jiang Huiqing, Shen Qingran. Does that mean Your Majesty thinks that I will fall in love with them? Shang Junlin pursed his lips and did not say a word. Shen Yu narrowed her eyes and suddenly leaned forward to bite Shang Junlin's face. Your Majesty, even if you don't believe me, you should believe in yourself. In this world, who can compare to Your Majesty? Why would I give up such a good Majesty and choose someone who is not as good as you? I am not as good as Yu says. I have a lot of unbearable things. Shen Yu bit him again. I won't allow anyone to belittle the person I like, even if that person is Your Majesty. Shen Yu bit down hard. After her lips left, she left a bite mark on the man's face. Looking at her masterpiece, Shen Yu was in a good mood. The pain on his face was almost negligible, but the soreness in his heart could not be ignored. Shang Junlin hugged the person in his arms tightly. The joy in his heart seemed to be about to fly out. Shen Yu closed his eyes and allowed Shang Junlin to peck his face like a puppy. He liked the feeling of being needed by Shang Junlin. It made him feel that he was truly living in this world. Shen Yu struggled to reach out from under the quilt and hugged Shang Junlin back. Since this matter was resolved, it was time to settle another matter. Shouldn't Your Majesty give me an explanation for what happened last night? Shen Yu could clearly feel that Shang Junlin's body stiffened. Chapter 182. What kind of explanation does you want? Shang Junlin understood that he was in the wrong last night, and Shen Yu got sick because of it. Imperial physician Ji Yu said that Your Majesty needs to restrain yourself. Then for the next month, Your Majesty should restrain yourself. I will ask Mu Shi to prepare another place for your majesty to sleep. Of course, your majesty can go back to your own palace if you want. Are these the only two choices? Your majesty's credibility with me has fallen to zero, so there are only these two choices. Shen Yu didn't want to be woken up in the middle of the night again. After thinking about it, it was better to sleep separately. Shang Junlin was very dissatisfied. He didn't want to be separated from Shen Yu. Even if it was just for a day, he didn't want to go anywhere else. I won't leave Yuzhong Palace. After a moment of silence, Shang Junlin said. Shen Yu guessed that he wouldn't be willing to leave. Hearing this, he pulled himself out of the man's arms and lay back on the bed. There are many palaces in Yuzhong Palace. Your Majesty can choose one to move in. Shen Yu didn't have enough energy. Mu Shi brought him the medicine that she brewed. After drinking it, he slept for a while. Shang Junlin hugged him and lay down for an hour. Then he got out of bed and went to the outer room to handle government affairs. In the evening, Shen Yu was woken up by Shang Junlin for dinner. After drinking the medicine and sleeping, Shen Yu's energy improved a lot. His body temperature also decreased. Shang Junlin brought a thick cloak and wrapped Shen Yu in it. The food was placed in the outer room. Shang Junlin carried him out. Because of Shen Yu's health, the dinner was made lightly. The cooks in Yuzhong Palace were good at cooking. Even if it was a light dish, it was still very appetizing. Smelling the fragrance, Shen Yu's stomach growled. He only ate a bowl of porridge for the whole day. He was already hungry. Shang Junlin showed unparalleled patience in serving Shen Yu. As the emperor, he was willing to do these small things for Shen Yu. Shen Yu was already used to Shang Junlin's meticulous care. She leaned on the man's shoulder and ate her fill. Shen Yu slept a lot during the day, so she was very energetic at night. She couldn't fall asleep, so she wrapped herself in a thick cloak and leaned on the soft couch to read Shang Junlin's reports. After the King of Yu was captured, there were still many things that Shang Junlin had to deal with. On the contrary, Shen Yu's life was more leisurely. The news of the King of Yu's defeat spread to all parts of the Great Huan Kingdom. Since it was close to the end of the year, all the vassals sent a lot of things to Shen Yu. They wanted him to test the emperor's attitude. Although they didn't participate in the King of Yu's rebellion, they were all vassals. It was impossible for them not to have any interactions. Now that the King of Yu was captured, they were very worried about whether they would be implicated. Shang Junlin had always wanted to take action against the vassals and take back their excessive control over their fiefs. Now was not a good time. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin went to see the congratulatory gifts sent by the vassals. These things were first sent to a small village outside the palace. Then, the hidden dragon guards secretly transported them to the imperial palace and put them in Yuzhong Palace. Vermilion boxes were neatly placed in the courtyard. Little eunuch Meng was taking people to register. When he saw them, he put down what he was doing and came over to salute. Eunuch Meng Jr. was Eunuch Meng's godson. Back then, Shen Yu had deliberately selected him because he saw that Eunuch Meng was reliable in handling matters. The facts proved that this was indeed the case. Since Yuzhong Palace was handed over to him to manage, Shen Yu did not need to worry too much. You don't need to be so polite. Is everything here? Shen Yu looked at the boxes in the courtyard that were almost full and asked. A part of it has been put in the warehouse. This is not finished yet. Little eunuch Meng called a little eunuch, took the register from his hand, and presented it to Shen Yu. Gui Jun, please take a look. Shen Yu took it. You go ahead. His Majesty and I will take a look. Little eunuch Meng knew that the two of them didn't like to be disturbed when they were together. So, he took the palace servants and retreated to the side to continue the unfinished business. Shen Yu opened the register and took a look. They are willing to spend money. All the things sent were exquisite and priceless. Shang Junlin casually opened the box beside his leg, and dazzling gems came into view. Shen Yu picked up one of the red gems and played with it in his hand. It seems that the supplies to aid Sube are not worth mentioning to them. Shang Junlin's gaze fell on Shen Yu's hand. Shen Yu's hand was white and slender. There was no imperfection in it. At this moment, when he held the blood-red gem, it made his skin look even whiter and more lustrous. It was more eye-catching than the gem. Shang Junlin's eyes darkened. Because he made Shen Yu unhappy last time, he hadn't been close to Shen Yu for a long time. If he didn't try his best, he might not be able to enter Shen Yu's bedroom. It was useless to enter. Shen Yu said that he didn't want him to sleep on the bed. Shang Junlin had to order the palace servants to put a small couch next to him. He slept on the couch at night. After playing with the gem for a while, Shen Yu put it back uninterestedly. The taxes from the feudal lords' fiefdoms are directly given to them. There are also the subsidies from the imperial court and the filial piety from the subordinates. It's normal to be able to give so many good things. I know. Shang Junlin opened the other boxes. Each box was priceless. The imperial court spends a lot of money every year to feed these people's ambitions. Now, these things are back in His Majesty's hands, aren't they? Shen Yu walked over and held Shang Junlin's hand. Yu is right. Do you like these things, Yu? Of course I like them. Shen Yu curved his eyes. I have already sent half of them to His Majesty's private warehouse. If you like them, you can keep them with you. Shang Junlin rubbed Shen Yu's fingers. Shen Yu shook his head. Liking them is one thing. I can't use so many of them. Giving half of them to His Majesty is my goodwill. His Majesty has given me so much. I also want to do something for His Majesty. Just like he knew that Shang Junlin wouldn't lack these treasures, he would give them to him if he wanted to. I heard that His Majesty dismissed Duke Shunbei. This news was heard from Mu Shi. Shang Junlin heard Duke Shunbei's words that day. Shen Yu knew that Shang Junlin would definitely do something, but he didn't expect that he would directly dismiss him. He sowed discord between Yu and His Majesty. He deserved it. Shang Junlin admitted frankly. Shen Yu suddenly approached Shang Junlin and looked up into his eyes. Why didn't His Majesty tell me? Are you afraid that I'll be angry? Shang Junlin stared at him for a while and slightly raised the corner of his mouth. Will you be angry? What do you think, Your Majesty? No matter what, Duke Shunbei is still my father. His Majesty dismissed him without a word. Shang Junlin raised his hand and touched Shen Yu's face. Yu doesn't seem to be angry now. Indeed, Your Majesty punished him well. Although he is my biological father, so what? If it weren't for the fact that the blood relationship can't be broken, I would have directly given up half of my bloodline. Shang Junlin sighed and hugged Shen Yu. From now on, I will always be here. Shen Yu's eyes were full of smiles. He raised his hand and hugged Shang Junlin's waist. Your Majesty, don't forget these promises. I won't forget. Never. This new year, Duke Shunbei's life was very difficult. First, he was fined his salary because he favored the concubine's son. Then, he was dismissed because of improper behavior. While others were happily preparing for the new year, Duke Shunbei's residence was gloomy. Shang Junlin's official position was taken away. In the imperial court, he clearly showed his dislike for Duke Shunbei. Many officials who had a good relationship with Duke Shunbei because of Shen Yu began to distance themselves from him. What was the most taboo for an official? The one who was in a higher position didn't like it. These people chose to be friends with Duke Shunbei because the emperor favored His Majesty. They tried to get some benefits for themselves. Now that Duke Shunbei was disliked by the emperor, they naturally chose to distance themselves. From being crowded to being completely deserted, it only took a few words. Duke Shunbei was ordered to reflect at home. He was not reconciled with the current result. He tried his best to see Shen Yu. Since the matter was caused by Shen Yu, it should be solved by Shen Yu. Shen Qingran's marriage was also cancelled. Those people were willing to agree with Duke Shunbei because of the benefits behind him. Now that Duke Shunbei had lost his official position and was disliked by the emperor and His Majesty, how could they not see the situation clearly before continuing the marriage? Duke Shunbei's marriage was cancelled one after another. Although it was a euphemistic attitude, he was still very angry. He knew what these people were thinking. They just felt that he had lost his power, so this deal was not worthwhile. After all, at the beginning, they agreed to let their daughter's child be adopted by His Majesty. They thought that Duke Shunbei's proposal was approved by His Majesty. Who knew that His Majesty didn't agree at all? Since His Majesty didn't agree, it was useless for them to think about it. Shun Qingran learned about this from the servant and laughed sarcastically. Shun Yu obviously had a grudge against Duke Shunbei's mansion. Duke Shunbei wanted to tie the two sides together through a child. It was really whimsical. How could Shun Yu be so easy to manipulate? These marriages were cancelled. Shun Yu finished drawing a red plum and put down the brush. Yes, I ordered people to pass the message to these people according to young master's instructions. They chose not to get involved in this muddy water. After knowing that Duke Shunbei had been dismissed from his position, Shun Yu sent people to visit the mansions of those who wanted to marry into Duke Shunbei's mansion. After all, these women were stirred up because of him. Shun Yu couldn't leave them alone. He had done what he should do and reminded them. If there were still people who chose to continue in the end, it was their own choice. Shun Yu wouldn't ask more. How is the situation in Duke Shunbei's mansion? It's very peaceful. Duke Shunbei is discussing matters with his confidants every day and doesn't go out. Second young master also restrained his temper and has been very low-key recently. Does Shun Qingran know about the arrest of Prince Yu? This. I don't know. Send people to find out. If he doesn't know, tell him the news. Shun Yu wanted to know. In this life, Prince Yu had fallen to this point. Would there be any friction between the two like in his previous life? Yes. Although she didn't understand why Shun Yu had to let Shun Qingran know about this matter, Shi still did as she was told. Where is His Majesty now? During this time, Shang Junlin was very busy. Shun Yu sometimes couldn't see him for the whole day. When he went to bed at night, Shang Junlin might not come back. When he woke up in the morning, Shang Junlin had already gone to court. He should be discussing matters in the imperial study. Shun Yu looked at the sky. It was almost time for dinner. He asked the small kitchen to make some food and took Shi to the imperial study. A few days ago, Eunuch Meng secretly complained to him that His Majesty was so busy that he even forgot to eat lunch and dinner. Eunuch Meng was guarding the door of the imperial study. He saw Shun Yu at a glance and hurriedly greeted him. Why are you here? I'm here to deliver dinner to His Majesty. Shun Yu walked into the imperial study. No one dared to stop him. Shang Junlin once said that Shun Yu could enter and leave any place in the palace at will. Shang Junlin was reviewing memorials. When he heard footsteps, he looked up. Are you? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.